kind of going through the different items until you get to, I guess, the treasurer's report. Then I can have a quick comment, and when we get to new business, then you'll turn it over to me to do the presentations.
Okay.
I just put it up here so kind of everyone can follow along.
Hello, Michael Jones here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, coming through good.
Great, thank you.
Well,
Hey, Keith, can you lower the volume in the chambers?
yes.
Okay, so Mark, looks like it sounds like we're live. Is that right, Keith?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay, we're good to go, Mark.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. It is January 20th, 2021, Inauguration Day. Happy New Year. The Economic Development Authority meeting for tonight is now called to order. At this time, Madam Secretary, do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
All right, very good. At this moment, we'll take the next item of business is we will approve the agenda. Offline, we had a request to switch items 7A and 7C. That 7C will actually come before 7A. So it'll be essentially 7C, 7E, then 7A. Follow that logic.
Yes.
So just minor change in the agenda. Otherwise, no other offline or suggested revisions to the agenda. Just take a moment. Does anyone have any other adjustments to the agenda before we begin? Okay, seeing none, then we will, I move to approve the agenda tonight. A second.
I second.
Okay. All right.
This is Michael.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any further discussion? No? All right, let's put it to a vote to approve the agenda. All those in favor of approving the agenda with the highlighted adjustment, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried that the current agenda is approved with the revision as just discussed. Okay, very good. The next item of business is citizen time. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up for citizen time?
No, we don't.
Okay. The next item for business is the reading, correction, and approval of the minutes. Due to time, we will not actually read every word verbatim, but I trust that since the minutes did go out, that we had an opportunity to read and review them. I did provide some offline adjustments and revisions to Lena, and they have been taken care of. And so I just wanted to provide a moment to see if there were any other adjustments to the minutes for December 8th.
No, I looked them over. Look good. They look fine to me.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Any other adjustments for the minutes? I'll take that as a no. So let's then, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from December 8th, 2020? Anyone, any of the directors may, please.
I move that we approve the minutes from the December 8th meeting.
Okay, that's Alder.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So the motion to approve and second is now on the table. Let's take it to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes for December 8th, 2020, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried. The minutes for December 8th, 2020 has been approved. Next item of business is the treasurer's report. I will now turn it over to the city manager for his report.
Great. So for this month, all we did was put the balance amount of the bank account on the agenda cover sheet. If you want the actual bank statement, please let me know. Maybe we can provide hard copies
Yes.
next time, although you all are virtual, so we can email it to you as well if you all want to get a copy of the bank statement as well going forward.
Thank you, Laszlo. Thank you. All right. The next item of business is...
Question.
Go ahead.
Do we know if Lynn Tabachi's name has been removed off the account? I did respond to that email.
They are working on that. Pon is working with the gentleman at the bank, and that will be taken care of.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Len. Good question. Any other questions or discussion related to the treasurer's report? All right. The next item of business, item number 6, is old business. Since our last meeting was really our inaugural meeting, pun intended, we didn't really have any old business to take care of. So we'll now move on to new business. So the first item is the city manager, new city hall, and infrastructure draft budget presentation. And I'll turn it over to Laszlo for his presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For everyone who can't see the screen in your packet, again, this is the presentation that was a former item C. It's titled City Hall and Public Infrastructure Budget, presented by the city manager. So if you want to find that presentation, that way you can follow along, and I'll do my best to kind of let you know which slide I'm on as well, so we can progress. So tonight we're going to have a few items to discuss. No action expected tonight from the EDA. Tonight is just more of a informational meeting to give you more background on what we've been doing, and we're going to start with a description of the city hall and the public infrastructure components of the downtown development. One of the key pieces or driving forces behind why we pursued the downtown development and the public part of the public-private partnership with Norton Scott. We want to discuss what the current status is of the actual budget, and there's some reference slides to prior presentations that I've made to the governing body, but I wanted to just give you all that background. If you tuned in last night to the governing body meeting, apologize, but we'll be repeating kind of the same messaging. If you didn't, then a lot of this stuff will be new, but again, we'll open up to questions and take our time to provide you the background on all the different public components that are being delivered to the city as part of this development, and then how we're paying for our share of those pieces through the development proceeds, but then also the specific financing mechanism that you'll be asked to act upon as the Economic Development Authority. When I'm done presenting the City Hall and Public Infrastructure overview, I'll turn it over to our financial advisors and bond counsel, who will go over some background of kind of what's going to be happening between the governing body and the EDA as separate legal entities, what the role will be of each in this process, the lease purchase component from the city, and then the actual issuance of the lease revenue bonds by the EDA. They'll cover that and answer any questions you may have about that process. And then after we get done with that, I'll kind of go over kind of the why from an economic development standpoint of what we're doing with the downtown, like why we're doing the downtown, but also exactly what all the other components are of the downtown beyond just the public components. That'll be the third presentation. So a lot of material to cover this evening, but it's good background for you all to understand kind of what we're doing, how we're doing it and why we're doing it as background before you take any action starting in February on these items. So first up, you'll see I have a lot of, actually, let me make this an actual presentation. Can you all still see that? Great. Okay. So this was a reminder slide that I showed last night to the governing body, but I'll present to you all as well. If you all attended the town hall, we did in-person town halls pre-COVID in early December of 2019 to again explain to the community what we were doing with the downtown and why we were doing it. And this was one of the slides that I had that talked about kind of the unfunded capital liabilities that were impacting the city. So the city in the 2000s was able to enter into financing agreements to fund 4 new schools, plus a police station, fire station, and community center, dealing with kind of the facility requirements of our departments. Over the last couple of years, we've also entered into a 20-year rent agreement for our Department of Social Services for private sector office space. So we've been able to address the facility needs of most of our departments, but the one department, actually the 2 entities that were not addressed, one was the Community Development Department, which includes the Department of Public Works and the Development Services team, which is split. The Development Services team works current City Hall building, and then the Public Works division of the Community Development Department works in the oldest public building in the city that used to be kind of a shared building between police and fire. But both that building, what we call the Public Works building, and the current City Hall building are beyond their life cycle and need major renovations or complete replacements. And these items have been on the CIP for quite a bit of time because the city didn't have the tax base even to support the existing facilities that were actually built in the 2000s, and that's why we've been struggling the last few years, let alone to finance the remaining capital liabilities that we had for the public buildings that we needed. The City Hall building, it was acquired in the late 80s, a smart transaction at that time, but it was never designed to be an office building. We've had to do a lot of renovations to kind of make it work, but there's a lot of ongoing major renovations and repairs that are needed to make this building work. Complete change in the HVAC system, elevator system. These are expensive kind of capital projects, but on the CIP, we've been showing kind of estimated costs of apples to apples replacements, but these are kind of older estimates. When I took over budgeting a few years ago, I moved these items from the CIP to what's called unfunded capital liabilities because we just didn't have the money. You know, we could dream about getting these facilities. There was just no way we were going to be able to finance them. So what I presented to the governing body a few years ago was like, look, we have these unfunded capital liabilities. We currently do not have the tax base to pay for them. So the only way we can deal with these unfunded capital liabilities is done via development, right? So entering into kind of development agreements where we get economic development benefits, but we also get either public components built out of those projects or the necessary revenues to then go ahead and finance these unfunded capital liabilities that continue to put burden on current taxpayers. So this is kind of a reminder slide from that town hall where I try to get the message out to the community about these unfunded capital liabilities that will impact their tax impact in the future if we didn't address intelligently through development agreements. And that's what we did here with this public-private partnership agreement. Not only are we getting a new city hall, which is not an apples to apples replacement, it's actually beyond what the current city hall is because it also includes 8,000 square foot library, which was never part of this original estimate for this city hall. And it includes some additional tenant space for us to lease out to private users. And then it includes a much more robust voter registrar space as well. With our early voting law changes, there's a certain need for additional kind of voting capacity without having to shut down the city manager wing and the governing body chambers of City Hall like we currently have to do during the voting period. So for the about 45 to 50 days prior to this last election, many of us did not have access to our offices in City Hall because we had to close those down to have enough space for elections. So we're getting a lot more than what was previously planned for the city hall, and we're generating revenues from proffers to go ahead and acquire another building in the city that will then be able to house the community development department all under one roof to improve their operational coordination. And then number two, that to provide some additional space for our school system, which is looking for some facilities for their transportation wing and for their facility management wing as well. And then they want to retrofit those existing spaces in the high school to provide voc tech opportunities for our high school students. So there's a lot of facility needs across the city. And again, we don't have the tax base to support it. Our residents are demanding that the tax rates actually come down as quickly as they can. So the only way to really finance these things are through a development agreement as we've done. So that's kind of some background on the public, the two major kind of public facility requirements that we're trying to accomplish, one of which is directly accomplished through this public-private partnership that we've entered into. So this was some background numbers that I provided to the governing body, kind of a 30-year projection, because that's how long our lease revenue bond payments will be. I wanted to show kind of what the profit will be from this development transaction, looking at just real estate tax value plus personal property value from the new development minus the cost of the lease purchase cost that we'll be paying for the city hall and the other public components. And you can see the net fiscal impact when the agreement was approved was roughly $92 million, and that was for a development that had 314 2-over-2 units and a 3-story city hall. We initially started with a 4-story option and 290 units. We wanted to provide us some extra cushion from a financial perspective, so we reduced the 4-story to a 3-story option, and we tried to bump up the number of residential units as well. So you can see kind of the profit from the original analysis this past summer was roughly a $92 million profit for future governing bodies, right? Current year, hopefully within the next couple years, and future governing bodies to do with as they please in terms of their policy priorities of reducing tax rates, increasing salary for our employees to improve retention, increasing staffing capacity, building up reserves for the city, dealing with our capital liabilities, and additional funding for our school system. So this is additional money profit that we would have for those efforts. And that profit does not even calculate the potential for sales, meals, and business license taxes, because we wanted to be ultra conservative in this analysis. As we get business deals signed in, the profit's only going to grow even further to allow for greater policy objectives to be accomplished. You can see here on the right that I kind of have the updated numbers. We weren't able, for the site planning, to get the full 314 units, so we only had 300 units. That reduces revenue, so this revenue piece right here goes down by approximately $5.5 million over the 30-year time frame. And then the lease purchase costs have gone up by an estimated $4.3 million, and I'm going to cover that later today when I have a comparison of our original budget that was factored here and what's changed in the updated budget and why those things changed. So our current profit projections have decreased from 92 million to 82 million, but still a very strong profit for the city over 30 years. That's after, again, this is profit. This is after payments for the lease purchase agreement. This is all for governing body objectives. When I presented this to the governing body in the spring, I initially had a separate slide as well that factored in what the fiscal impacts would be to city departments as well. And there was still a profit of roughly $25 million, even after factoring impacts to schools, police, fire, et cetera, from adding the new residential units. The reason why we removed that's kind of a traditional fiscal impact analysis. We removed that from the analysis because we've added over 400 residential units over the last few years between the Palisades apartments and then the Artena apartment. But we didn't take that revenue and say, oh, we need to spend it X% on this department, X% on that department to cover the impact. We used it to fund kind of the priorities of the governing body. So that's exactly what I want to show the governing body is here's the money that you're going to have discretion for how to spend, right? Clearly there's going to be some impacts. So we want to make sure that we're covering operational capacity, but that will be again guided by the current and future governing bodies with recommendations from the current and future city managers of the city.
The question is that 92 million per annum or 92 million spread over the 30 years? Over
the 30 years. Yep. Okay. So we actually talk about kind of the public components of the development. In a later presentation tonight, I'll go over kind of the full development, what it entails. But for this presentation and for the purposes of the lease revenue bond process that the EDA is going to be involved in, I want to focus the conversation right now more on the public components that the city is getting from this development agreement, some of the key priority public components that we want to accomplish. And later you'll see that I'm going to add what the price is for each of these components as well. So this is kind of a slide that I repeat, but then in the later slide I actually add what the cost will be for the city for these components. So the first component, the city has been working with the VRE and the regional kind of transportation components to get a garage here in our city, because pre-COVID, if you would head over to those lots, you would see that there was not enough parking spaces in the existing VRE lots. So they were able to secure, grant funding for the construction of a 3-level garage, 550 spaces for VRE riders Monday through Friday during the workday, and then in the evenings and weekends for the city to support our other public and downtown components. As part of this agreement, we're going to actually add a 4th level to that garage, a ground level that will be held by the city and controlled by the city for public parking components. So the total volume of parking spaces is now at 676 is the planned number of parking spaces, 131 of which will be available for public parking at all time, and then the remaining amount being available for VRE users during the work week and in the evenings and weekends for all other downtown uses as well. So there's a new ground level garage space or level that the city is going to be securing through this downtown development agreement for public purposes. There's a road.
So the parking on the first level will be identified as Manassas Park only people or people with business in Manassas Park? Because I don't know how you're going to keep the VRE guys from parking there. Over.
Yeah, I think initially the concern will be the opposite, right? That more people are going to be using it for non-VRE purposes because the VRE is building out that garage based off a 20-year plan, right, for growth in ridership. So you're right. There's going to be an issue with between VRE riders and city users. So what we have to do is kind of coordinate with all the different elements of the downtown to determine kind of what the structure of that parking needs to be. Does it need to be a 2-hour parking? Does it need to be 3-hour parking? Or what other parking regulations do we want to put in there to make sure that VRE riders aren't using it during the daytime as well? But we want to encourage, other non-VRE riders to use that lot as much as possible. But there's some flexibility. And just for your all situational awareness, we're going to retain ownership of the land and of the garage. We're going to be leasing the top 3 levels to the VRE, who's going to be using that grant funding to actually build those 3 levels. We'll retain ownership of it if the VRE in 40, 50 years, because of who knows what technology change, decides that they don't need, that parking or the VRE station. The city then retains ownership of that garage as well, and then we're free to do with that space as we please, as long as again we're satisfying what the grant requirements were for public parking components as well, which is what our intent was, or at that time, to make any adjustments to support what the future of transportation will look like at that time. So that's kind of built into this.
Mr. Palco, aside from the lease arrangement with the VRE, does the parking garage provide any further economic benefit? Like, are there per day rates or anything like that built into the structure? For
the garage
opportunity.
Yeah, so why the city was interested in working with the VRE for this garage was because This garage allows the downtown to happen, right? The theater that I'm negotiating with would not have been interested in this development if it wasn't for the fact that you're going to have a garage parking infrastructure built adjacent, to that anchor style business that requires heavy parking components. The different businesses that I'm engaging with are interested because you have, again, that garage, which again provides the requisite kind of parking infrastructure during peak periods of their use, which are going to be Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday, and Sundays, kind of the off times from VRE riders. So they provide them that parking capacity that many downtowns struggle with. We have that here. It also provides free marketing, right? So you have a bunch of people coming from, you'll see in a later slide tonight in my economic development overview, we've defined partnering with two different retail consulting firms what our different market areas are, primary, secondary, tertiary markets. I can tell you that the VRE and the library, the central library, which is kind of being downsized and which we're going to try to take market share with our downtown library, they tap into those tertiary markets that I'm identifying. I'll show you which parts of the tertiary market they tap into, along with our community center. Surprisingly, our community center also taps into a lot of those tertiary markets as well. So you get a lot of free marketing of the downtown, of those businesses, from all those riders coming from kind of that southwestern Fairfax County area that I'll show you later, and the surrounding Prince William County areas as well. That's a big chunk. The majority of the riders using that station do not come from the city. So again, you're bringing people from other markets to your downtown. That's free marketing, and it helps your efforts to capture those secondary and tertiary markets that we're going to want to do, because our retail analysis was very conservative, and it was based purely almost entirely on a primary market strategy. So the more we can start tapping into the secondary and tertiary markets, the more revenues will actually be coming to the city, the more customer demand, and then in the future, the greater potential for additional commercial developments beyond what we're talking about here. We're essentially creating that market through the types of businesses that we're bringing in, and the garage is what's a big part of what's making that feasible.
Thank you.
For public road B, this is another public road that provides two critical public components. One is a direct access to the ground level that the city controls for parking, and it also provides direct access, quickest access to this new City Hall parking lot that I've identified here as well. And this is the City Hall building. So right now, the current City Hall, if you look at this right now, imagine you're looking at the current layout, or the current what exists right now. The current City Hall exists right over here. That'll eventually be demolished. So this will be built first, this phase 1A. We'll move from this current City Hall across the street to the new City Hall, then that will be demolished to make way for the anchor tenant in what's called Building B. But right now, this is the location of the City Hall building. Another public component is the public plaza, plus all the nice streetscape that we're asking the developer to put in here as we try to make this a central community gathering space for our public events, any public ceremonies, anything we want to do to bring our community together for events, and even outside, again, those secondary and tertiary market people, to bring them to our downtown through robust events that again add to that marketing and add to kind of the revenue base of our community. That's what's being designed as part of this public plaza as well for public control of the future of kind of city events. An additional two public roads as well, or at least our share of those roads. These are primarily, you'll see in the dollar amounts, are not actually that much for the roads, because for these two especially, there's a residential component that's paying the biggest chunk of those road improvements for those pieces. And then additional public parking. Again, we will retain ownership of this site here and control the parking. Again, we want to control as much of the downtown infrastructure as possible to give us the best shot at being successful with the entire kind of downtown development program, and give us the best, put us in charge in the direct lead of attracting the businesses that we want to get for our community as part of this transaction.
Hey, this is Michael. I have a quick question. On the parking, City Hall parking lot,
Yes.
how many parking spots is that? And is that because we're expecting that many people? What's the capacity, I guess, that's expected for City Hall? Is that enough parking or more or not enough?
It's more than enough. So I don't have off the top of my head the numbers, but that was discussed as part of the rezoning. So the planning and zoning administrator looked at kind of the development, right? Everything that was coming in, the public component of the City Hall building, and used kind of the ratios that are set out in our zoning regulations, with the developer needing to meet kind of those ratios of what the parking requirements are for the City Hall purposes, which essentially mirror kind of what commercial office users' spaces are, and we think the library as well. Those are the different components again that the planning and zoning administrator presented to the planning commission, reviewed that, and made a recommendation to the governing body, letting them know that the parking requirements were being met. There were waivers for the residential component, but that's not really applicable to what we're talking about here. But from a City Hall standpoint, we have exactly what we need in terms of satisfying the requirements from a employee standpoint, and all the customers that come in for voting, for voter registration, paying their water bill, for the library, which is going to be a big generator as well. So we have enough parking for City Hall users.
Okay, and then a second question, is that exclusive, is that after hours? Is it also for the general public, or is it reserved only for City Hall?
Yeah, so, okay. This is City Hall parking. I have to, so it's for City Hall. That's all I can say right now.
Okay.
There's a lot more to this full agreement, but this is for City Hall parking exclusively, to support the City Hall. Yeah, I understand, but that's the primary objective with this parking identified in this area is to cover the City Hall parking requirements, the public component.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
You have other items that are part of this, the associated utilities. So what you find with many parking and transportation projects is usually the biggest cost components of that are going to be your stormwater, your water and sewer, all your piping. Those are part of this as well. Undergrounding of utilities along Manassas Drive. So when you drive out along the street, you'll see you have a lot of those light poles and wires hanging on the street. We want to put those underground. That was a kind of a last minute addition that the governing body put into the PPA, and we're incorporating that now as part of this latest budget agreement. And then of course, you're always going to have a bunch of site work as part of any development, any new construction, and that's factored into this as well. This was a slide that I had presented to the governing body back on June 9th as they were preparing for their final vote on the PPEA. And what this showed to them was all the costs associated with the City Hall and public infrastructure at that time. Again, pre the developer getting the thumbs up that they can start investing a lot of money in actual, design and engineering, robust design and engineering to get closer to a final budget. These were the projected costs. And then if we got all the revenues from a proffer standpoint and land transaction standpoint up front, what the net would be, kind of the discount rate for these expenditures, what we would actually pay for the 35 million, the 17 million, right? If we were to get all the proffer money up front and all of the land value up front, right? It was just to kind of show that the development was allowing us to do these public uses at a much discounted rate because of all the transactions that we were approving. In reality, it's a little bit more complex how we're actually doing this because we're not getting all these revenues up front. They're kind of sequenced, but this was just kind of more of a visual so that the public and the governing body understood that we were getting a ton of public uses at a significantly discounted rate because of the development agreement that we were entering into. And then you saw on the previous slide that even beyond this, whatever we end up going to the EDA issuing in terms of lease revenue bond and the city paying in terms of the annual lease purchase agreement payments is more than funded by the revenues generated by the development, with a significant profit after the remaining payments. But this is kind of a background to kind of show the value that this development is bringing to allow us to do the capital transactions at a significantly discounted rate.
And this is before any real commercial entity moves into all of this, before we get our anchor, right? This is just from proffers and other agreements related to the land. Is that right?
Absolutely. The 17 million has nothing to do with the actual, what's going to be developed. This is before any, unit comes in. If you're just looking at what the proffer value is and the land transaction values that we're getting out of this, what applying that to show the discount that we're getting for these public uses. In reality, though, this is not how we're paying for this thing. It was just kind of another exercise for the public to see kind of the discount that we're getting for the public components. In reality, again, we're going to enter into that lease purchase agreement. We're going to pay that lease purchase agreement via the annual proceeds that we're getting from the development, which again, after making those payments from the lease purchase agreement, you're still generating that $82 million profit beyond that for city taxpayers. So this column here was based off the original budget that I was talking about in the previous slide, minus a couple of financing nuances right here that the financial team from Norton Scott had projected, what the capitalized interest costs would be and potential financing premiums as well. We took those out because we're not going to know any of that stuff here until we actually go to when the EDA finally goes and issues the final bonds. We'll be able to factor that in. So we're removing that from this analysis and just looking at what the original costs were for the city hall itself, the infrastructure and the land costs, and what the updated numbers are based off of now. June 16th, the governing body approved the PPEA. Norton Scott then began the more robust design engineering process to better understand what these cost figures are going to be, and they're still working on it. This is still a draft. That's why I have this up here. Within the next, probably by early March, we'll have the final budget, and that final budget will already also have been bid by the developer, so they'll actually have a construction bid on hand that will deliver that final kind of budget price as well. And then the only price increases beyond that will be from change orders from the city itself if we identify that during the project. But again, these are updated costs up here. So you can see, for example, the city hall original cost estimate was 16.4 million. It's up now to 17.5 million. And I'm going to describe kind of what the drivers were for that. And then the infrastructure also went up by nearly $1 million. We got a little bit of savings from some of the land closing costs that we had for some of the land transactions we had. But overall, increase in costs by about just under $2 million. We also are losing revenues from upfront revenues as well from this transaction because of the reduced residential units that I discussed before. So instead of 174 units that are part of that first phase that's being factored into this lease purchase agreement, it's down to 164 units, which results in a loss of $500,000 in revenue from payments from Norton Scott to the city, right, to reduce our lease purchase costs up front that need to go towards EDA financing. So we lost revenue about $500,000. So in total, there's a increase in budget by close to $2.5 million. Does that make sense before I go into kind of what drove these changes? Okay. So the drivers of the cost increase for the City Hall first, again, a much bigger design scope than what was anticipated, a lot more kind of back and forth between city staff, our consultants, all the different elements, and the developer and their team to make sure we kind of get the best product that we can. So that was an increased budget that was not anticipated prior. $800,000 increase in the base building costs, but you can see that half of that is for just increased contingency with, in general, you've seen this a lot in this region with transportation and other projects. You're just seeing inflated, bids coming back from companies for actual construction projects right now. So we wanted to bump up that contingency a little bit. The city also pushed for additional kind of facade improvements, especially at the entrance of the new city hall, to make it look more like a public building city hall entrance versus a generic office building. And we also had some additional kind of safety improvements made to the building in terms of emergency exits, ballistic glass components as well that our police and fire departments were recommending for the developer. And that was kind of a part of the increase of the base building budget. In terms of internal improvements, the original design did not include all gender family restrooms and lactation area. We felt that was an important part to our community to satisfy all the different requirements that we have in our community that we've seen from engagement with our community. So we wanted to make sure that we were incorporating those elements into our internal layout, along with additional fire suppression upgrades that were recommended for our different technology rooms, like our server room, our computer room, to keep those assets as safe as possible, and then some additional roof improvements to make sure that we have the necessary kind of infrastructure on our roof to satisfy all the needs of the different components that will be in this building as well. Those were kind of the major city hall cost drivers from what was originally presented in the governing body back in the spring. That was based off of a very early estimate pre-major design engineering when they were waiting for the approval of the public-private partnership agreement. Infrastructure cost increases when they went out and did the actual tech investigations. Just the topography presented some different challenges that you'll see also in the city hall, with the need for a retention wall that was not planned for, and just some additional excavation as well. That's going to be part of the site work. That is a major component that drives up cost. Stormwater, you always have increased costs with stormwater, so it's just additional piping as their design engineering teams were working with our community development department and our engineers, Bowman, to review kind of their stormwater plan and impact and kind of what we know to be DEQ requirements. There was just additional need for piping and improvements to a stormwater vault as well to make sure that we were in compliance with DEQ requirements. And then again, it was uncertain what the video screen, the splash pad, the public plaza components would be. Once again, when they got the green light to go with the PPA, then we started bringing in actual firms who will do this, right? So the firm that will install the screen on the plaza to broadcast different things for the people on the plaza, plus a splash pad. So we got updated costs for those, and that was higher than what was originally anticipated. This was, again, this bullet here was a last minute addition by the governing body to underground the overhead power along Manassas Drive, and the negotiated agreement between the governing body and the developer was that we would split those costs 50-50, so that the developer would be part of that process as well, putting those underground. So we incorporated that into this budget. That wasn't part of the original budget, which was the last minute addition. The second to last bullet about gas service, we're hoping to reduce that projection because initially, as we were dealing with Columbia Gas, there was not enough kind of gas pressure, but we think my community development director, Calvin O'Dell, and we met with Columbia Gas last week and the developer, and we think we have that worked out. So there'll still be some cost component to connecting to that, but not as much as we were anticipating with this draft budget. So I'm hoping that number will drop slightly. And then again, we talked about kind of the topography challenges and the need for that retaining wall that is going to be adding cost to the original anticipated infrastructure costs. Any questions on this?
Where would this facility sit?
Which facility?
Sorry, not City Hall, but the other. I think you're referring to the Public Works facility. This infrastructure cost.
Yeah. That's not going to be part of this, right? That's not part of the.
Okay.
This is just City Hall and the associated kind of infrastructure to support that. Why I talked about the Public Works building in previous slides, I was just showing what our unfunded capital liabilities are. Now, again, my recommendation to the governing body is that we use, the proceeds from a proffer standpoint and a tap fee revenues for water and sewer tap fees, since the Public Works manages our enterprise funds. We utilize a lot of those revenues to go ahead and satisfy the Community Development Department facility requirements by acquiring an existing building that's a little bit newer and in better shape to satisfy that unfunded capital liability. Without this development, we wouldn't even have a shot at doing that. So that was kind of just the reason why I presented that. But that community development building is not part of what you see here.
Understood. Thank you. This is all just City Hall. Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oops. Okay. So here, this is just a repetition of a previous slide that I showed, but it just shows you what the cost components are for each. And you can see that the biggest driver, of course, is going to be the actual building itself, and the internal components is the majority of the total cost, along with that extra level of garage. Garage parking is always going to be much more expensive than the surface parking requirements. And again, you can see how small the actual road expenditures will be as a proportional share to the rest of it, and how high the actual utility costs are for this project. The site work, again, with the topography and everything else, what those costs will be. So this slide just gives you all and the governing body an overview of the budget, but by kind of the different components, laying it out on a map as well for what are the different cost drivers of this project. Any questions on this? Okay. And I just wanted to show you kind of what this will look like. We hope to have, again, hopefully by no later than our meeting in March, I hope to have a lot better updated kind of 3D imaging graphics to kind of show you what this will look like. But this is what we have right now, but I at least wanted to show you these images to kind of give you a feel for what the City Hall building will look like, exterior and interior layouts, the flow of the City Hall, and also the plaza. So these pictures, things have changed since this is what we used as the PPA was going to be voted on. Not much has changed with the plaza, just some minor changes, but the majority components are still in. So this is kind of where the splash pad is. This is the City Hall building, a commercial building that the developer will own. The video screen here with outdoor seating, and for context for the video screen, if you're interested in that, you can go up to another town center development called One Loudon. They have a similar kind of screen where they'll showcase, college football, different kind of events or sporting events and other things that will attract people to the town center for outdoor dining and events as well. So not much has changed in terms of this, just kind of the configuration of the plaza. Across the street, you kind of have more open green space and kind of space for bands to set up so that we can have outdoor concerts where we would close off all of this, right, and just funnel traffic around through those other roads that are part of this in order to have larger events in this area, including concerts and other things as well, farmers markets, other components. So not much has changed with the plaza, so this is still kind of relevant to show you this, and this is kind of a good idea of what the new City Hall building will look like from a street view. So if you were standing across the street in front of the current Park 170, looking kind of diagonally across the street, roughly this is kind of what the look and feel will be of the new City Hall building. This is kind of the internal flow and layout, and I'm just going to walk you through it. This is the main entrance here. So as a reminder, the plaza would be up here where my cursor is, if you can see that. And the main entrance would be here on the side. When you walk in, you'll see kind of a little kind of reception area, and you'll see an image of what that would look like, a 3D image of what that would look like. To the right will be the first floor of the library, which will mainly be kind of adult oriented, with a coffee shop connected right here as well to kind of give it that bookstore cafe concept for our library. There's an internal stair network within the library, so you can walk up to the second floor this way, or you can come back out and take these elevators if you want to use an elevator to get to the second floor. But assuming you walk up these stairs here, you're in the second floor component of the library. Down here is kind of the teen section, You get more adults going all the way up here. You have some seating up here, essentially overlooking the plaza, and then you have your children's section here. You have study rooms in these areas. You have a shared conference room, which in the evening, if we need it for closed sessions, the governing body would utilize that, but this is mainly available during the daytime and library hours for additional kind of study meeting room for the library. And then the board chambers where the governing body meets Tuesday evenings, where the school board will meet Monday evenings, planning commission and EDA Wednesday evenings. When it's not being used by those boards, this is an additional larger room that seats 120 people for additional library programming, such as story time and other programs the library will have. So again, we're very efficiently utilizing, maximizing dual usage of spaces to maximize the library. So the library is around 8,000 square feet, not counting some of these shared spaces, the board chamber, which they'll use for programming, and then the additional kind of conference room for additional study area and meeting areas for the library. Coming back downstairs from the library, if you come back out to the main lobby again, you'll have kind of an interactive directory of City Hall. And if you keep walking straight here, this is where the voter registrar section will be of City Hall. This is the waiting area for voter registration as well, and also the kind of the backup line for the actual voting day. These are kind of the windows, the customer service windows for the registrar to register people to vote. They're back offices, an open office concept to reduce the number of offices that are part of this building, and then different kind of back-end functions such as storage, kitchenette, kind of conference room for the different volunteers and the electoral board as well, and for the voter registrar utilize. This is the actual voting area, so much more robust voting area than what we currently have right now to make sure that we're satisfying not only the day of voting requirements, but also now early voting, which pre-COVID, when we looked at kind of what the numbers will be from early voting, we knew that we needed a much more robust infrastructure to support kind of early voting in our City Hall as well. So we kind of got the facility requirements that we were trying to do in another facility in the city for the voter registrars. We were able to fit that in as part of this new City Hall design. So if you end up going upstairs to the second floor, again, we already talked about the library. If you turn left, this is the city admin portion of City Hall. This is where the city manager, city attorney, HR, finance will be, and initially some of the community development department components until they get their own building as well. Once the community development department moves out of here into their own building, then this is kind of the additional space for future growth of the city administrative and support team as we go out to 2030, 2040, et cetera, for additional staffing requirements. So we wanted to look to the future as well to make sure we have plenty of office space. Majority of the spaces, again, are going to be that open office concept with cubicles. And then you have the kind of the board area, which I talked about before, with kind of a workroom for our governing body and school board and planning commission, in the mailroom and additional conference rooms as well to be shared between the boards and the city admin team as well. And then you have kind of a kitchenette, additional kind of area for meetings or just for employees to kind of get away from everything as well. Taking the elevators up to the third floor. When you get out of the third floor elevator, if you turn to the left, this is the treasurer and commissioner of revenue section. So this is a customer waiting area where you're going to have a couple kiosks, a kiosk for getting a ticket, a number for kind of service, the service that you need between the commissioner and the treasurer, and another kiosk to just make payments there to hopefully not have to wait in line to actually be serviced, but to actually do the transactions there. But let's assume they take a ticket, they can have a seat now in these areas, and they'll be called up to one of these customer service windows between the commissioner and treasurer. We wanted to co-locate these two offices as much as state law permits us. There are kind of state law regulations that requires them to be separated, which is very inefficient for our customers. But again, we at least wanted them in the same area as part of this new City Hall to try to get some more collaboration and make it a more user-friendly experience for our customers. We also are exploring the options of having kind of that customer service window number also shown in the library, so people want to wait in the library instead of waiting in the customer service waiting area, they can do that as well. If you come back out to the hallway and go further up, this is all the school areas. So this is the entrance to the school administrative offices, or the school central offices, and all of this part of the third floor is for their office requirements. And you also have some additional kind of city back-end offices, or central storage room, or server room, and computer room. So I know that's a lot, but are there any questions kind of about the internal layout of the future City Hall? Okay. Again, when you walk into the main entrance of the City Hall, this is kind of what it will look like. Nice flooring. You see kind of the stone facade that they're using inside, and we're doing something very similar on the exterior as well, just around the entrance to make it a lot nicer, make it look a little bit more like a City Hall as well. If you go straight, this is kind of the voter registrar area that I talked about before, and I'll show you what that looks like, just to give you an idea of kind of what the office component will look like. If you turn right when you come in here, you'll look into the library, right? So that's that staircase to the second level of the library, and then this is the first floor component of the library. You can see kind of the coffee shop back here that's connected to the library. If you're standing from kind of this chair here at the end, looking back, this is kind of what you would see in the first floor as well. So just to kind of give you a feel for what the look and feel of the library will be. If you take these steps up to the second level, when you get out, you'll see kind of this area. You don't see the team section here, but kind of some initial seating areas, the governing body chamber that again is also a programming area for the library. If you keep walking down here is where you have the study rooms and the other component of the second floor library, the adult section and the children's section over here, and you don't see kind of on this side here the additional kind of seating and book area that's overlooking the plaza as well. But this, again, is not fully comprehensive of what the library will be. It's just to give you kind of a feel for what the new library will look like. This is what the voter registrar, rough kind of 3D imaging of what that will look like as well. Again, the customer service windows, the back-end offices, and the waiting area, and the voter room. And then again, the pantry kind of kitchenette areas for city staff and the school administrative staff on the third floor as well, just to again give you kind of a feel for what the interior of this building will look like. Any questions on the interior before I move to kind of exterior look and feel?
Actually, I have a question. Just
Sure.
out of curiosity, what's the approximate distance from the coffee shop to the VRE? Is it walking distance?
You know, I had that answer at because the council member asked me that as well when we were looking at the rezoning. It is walking. You're literally, so if you're parking here, the exit, right, for pedestrians, one exit is over here. So if you're exiting here, there's actually, you don't see it on this image, but there's like a walkway kind of streetscape component here that the developers now have in the latest and greatest, that you walk here and literally across the street here, you're right there. You're talking about within kind of 100, 200 feet. I had the exact number of feet in the rezoning. I just don't remember what that was, but it's literally just right across the street.
Thank you.
Any plans for that commercial building that's next to City Hall?
Yeah.
Any ideas of what they would do there? Because that could be a competition.
Yeah, no. When we do that's why we're in partnership with the developers. We're working closely with Park 170 across the street, the owners there, Hosta Capital. We want to make sure we're having a diverse array of cuisine options so that you don't have businesses kind of tearing into each other. But this building here will likely be 2 restaurants of diverse, again. So when I say diverse, I'm talking about 1 tequila bar, right? 1 Cajun style food, 1 Asian restaurant, 1 Italian, 1 barbecue, 1 burger place, right? Trying to make sure that they don't eat into each other's business. So this will likely be 2 restaurants that we're going to want a significant kind of outdoor seating component and alcohol component to kind of make the plaza area more alive. And with the changes to state law being proposed right now as a response to COVID-19, but likely to kind of carry on before, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of outdoor alcohol permitting on areas like a public plaza as well. So that's going to be a game changer for restaurants to help them recover post COVID-19. And that's as I'm engaging with the two businesses that I'm targeting here that we're in good, close discussions right now. That's a big part of what they want to do as well. And having the city to kind of partner with them as part of that public plaza for, tents during the winter and other things, that's very attractive to them as well. But this will likely be two restaurants here, a coffee shop here, and then either one or two additional restaurants here on the ground level here, and then the theater with another restaurant here, and then commercial offices on top of the theater on this side. Again, I'm going to go over more of that stuff in my later presentation when I go over more of the commercial components tonight. Or this first presentation is really more focused kind of on the public goals, the public components that we're getting out of this development. But I'll go over more kind of what the vision is for this downtown at the later presentation. Go back to exterior again. This is not a lot of change from what I showed before, but I just do want to show that the splash pad, we're kind of going with a unique diamond shape for the splash pad. About 18 of the actual fountain heads that are part of this. As a comparison, one Lauren has 20. That's a pretty good size splash pad. So we have a pretty decent sized splash pad here for our community kids to play here, and a lot of outdoor seating area for our residents and for the visitors of our downtown, benches, landscaping. Again, that screen right here for viewing. But so not a lot of change to the plaza. You have this walkway as well in between the City Hall building and the commercial building C. And you have some pretty nice, I don't have the images, but from what they were showing us, some pretty nice stone style benches along this walkway as well. And then a flagpole roughly over here, right close to the entrance, the City Hall entrance, which is further down here. Looking from across the street, what the City Hall building and the plaza will look like. This one's a little bit outdated because it doesn't show the retaining wall, but the next slide you'll see what the retaining wall, it actually adds, topography actually adds some nice features to the plaza. So the screen ends up getting elevated, so you can actually see it a little bit further out as well because of the topography, but this is kind of the screen. We're going to be entering into a branding exercise here, and the branding consultants will be here for the next EDA meeting. They're going to want to engage with you about city branding, city marketing, but once we kind of wrap up that exercise and know how we're going to do that, then that's where we'll put a sign here on the back of the screen as well to consistent with kind of city signage goals that we're going to want to have. And the other side would be the screen, the outdoor seating areas, and not seeing here again, the splash pad would kind of be in the center part as well. Colored image with that retaining wall, again, kind of adding a nicer feature to that, but you can see kind of the initial color palettes that we're looking at for the City Hall building. Again, if you want to envision this would kind of, the second level would be a library overlooking the plaza. In the first level, that coffee shop, and then that restaurant, or a restaurant with a kind of a smaller deli or ice cream shop combination on this side, and then the rest of all the additional office uses for the City Hall. And again, just another view, not a color view, but just another view with the retaining wall, greater area, plaza area, including the commercial building C that's adjacent to City Hall. And actually, so if you're on this plaza here and you're walking between commercial building C and the City Hall building, you keep walking, this is kind of that area here, that walkway area, and the City Hall entrance is going to be here. Again, in that March meeting, I hope to have kind of the latest and greatest fully colored three-dimensional images to kind of show you what, kind of a walkthrough of what this will look like using better 3D technology. I just want to start giving you a feel. Again, this is not the most updated. The most updated has a lot more stone features in this, but this is the City Hall entrance. So we added a lot more kind of stone features, the flagpole, again, to make it look a lot more like a City Hall entrance. This is kind of the rear loading dock area that we have right now in the City Hall. We're kind of retaining that in this City Hall as well. It just allows for better mobility of the different components that we have in the City Hall. And there's kind of the voting area as well within the City Hall building. There's just another view of kind of this walkway, just a little bit further out for the City Hall entrance, the building, and then the commercial building C. Again, coming back out to the plaza, you can see the splash pad. Again, this is a little bit outdated. Now we have the diamond shape and kind of that walkway. They're using a lot more kind of the stone benches along the walkway as well. But you just kind of get a feel for that kind of outdoor ambiance and that we're trying to go for with this plaza as a amenity for our community and for those that are visiting our downtown. Another view, again, just a different view of the plaza and looking down that walkway and of the two buildings that are part of this process. And that's all I have for kind of the City Hall and public infrastructure overview and budget discussion. Are there any questions on this before I turn it over to the financial advisors and our bond council to discuss your role in terms of the lease revenue bond, which is what the developer essentially is going to be tapping into as construction funds to do this project, by which then the city will pay back at a discounted rate, again, as I showed you in that previous slide, over a 30-year lease purchase mechanism. So are there any questions here before we turn it over to our financial advisors?
I have a question.
Sure.
I was wondering if there were any other similar developments that the city looked at when getting ideas to come up with this proposal. And then also I was wondering if you're familiar with the Mosaic District in Fairfax County. They are it's a very plaza gathering oriented type development design. And it really caters to the outdoor events, just with even curb and gutter design, everything to make it very friendly for large groups to come together and congregate and have these outdoor events to bring the community together. And I guess I was wondering if anyone's looked into anything like that.
Yeah, we looked at Mosaic. That's where they have the Target and that theater as well, and a bunch of restaurants in that outdoor area. We looked at Fairfax Corner. We looked at One Loudon. We looked at Loudon Station. We looked at even Stonebridge down in Woodbridge for kind of the Alamo Draft House there as well. So we did look at a lot of these modern town centers to try to, again, capture the feel. The biggest limiting factor, to be honest with you, is what exists across the street, right? So had we had full control of our land, of what existed across the street, that land for both phases 1 and 2, which I'll describe at a later briefing, along with this, I think we could have designed something a lot better. But unfortunately, kind of I'm working around the edges of what I've kind of been handed, and I've had to kind of deliver kind of what's best, best feasible project to still entice the developer to come in here, make the investments that they have to make with the limiting amount of acres that I had left. So like if I could start from scratch and across the street didn't exist, we would have something much better, because we worked with marketing firm Street Sense to kind of who helped design a lot of these town centers across the region, including the National Harbor as well. They looked at this as well, and again, we would have done it completely different had we had that land as well. But so yeah, like this is, to be honest, this is kind of the best we could get right now, and it's probably a little bit closer to kind of a Loudon Station feel with kind of the Metro Garage there for kind of what they're doing. But we want to do a lot more events. Every kind of town center, that's what helps them really take off, are those events. And in my previous job as a Lovettsville town manager, that was a big part of our square development. We developed a little town square, with a lot of restaurants to kind of cater to the winery tourism industry that existed out in that area. And we did a ton of community events that brought in thousands of people into our development to kind of enhance that as well. And it was a very successful effort. That's what we're going to look at doing here. Much easier here because I have a Parks and Rec department who specializes in that. So we're going to really ramp up kind of the event portfolio that we have as a community once we get the product, which is the downtown businesses, to really make this successful. But just doing a farmer's market where in an area that has no businesses that are kind of pulling people there, it doesn't really do that much. Once you actually have the businesses and the nice product in place and nice spaces, then that kind of, those activities start making a lot more sense, as do kind of weekend concerts, movies on the green, community festivals with a lot of beer tents. That's what drives a lot of people to the region. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. But again, this is kind of the best thing that we could fit in this limited area that we have, while still allowing for the requisite residential units that would actually entice the developer to come in here and do this.
Thank you. It looks great. I was just curious.
Sure.
Great question, Laura.
Any other questions on this before we move on to the next presentation? Okay, close this one out. So this next.
Mr. Palco, thank you for that compelling presentation. I think, you know, it was definitely eye-popping for sure.
Right.
At this point, we'll transition to our next presentation, which is the lease revenue bond issuance process update by Davenport and McGuire Woods. And who's going to be giving that presentation?
Yeah, so I'll quickly introduce them, and they can introduce themselves. But I'll turn it over to Joe. Maybe you want to introduce yourself and the team.
Sure. Thank you, Oswald. My name is Joe Mason. I represent Davenport and Company. Our firm and myself in particular have had the honor and privilege of serving as financial advisor to the City of Manassas Park for about 14 years. This is not the first lease revenue bond transaction the city has done. One was done back in the 2010 timeframe. So this is not an entirely new security type to do. These are bonds that are secured by lease purchase payments made by the city. And we'll go into more of the legal structure and so forth, but I wanted to introduce my colleagues on the line as well. First is my Davenport colleague, Jimmy Sanderson. I brought him along for this particular transaction, which has elements, as we've discussed here this evening, of a public-private partnership, and he's really an expert in that field, and wanted to have his legal background and expertise to deploy on behalf of the city. We are also joined by a representative from McGuire Woods, T.W. Bruno, who serves as the city's bond counsel. So we'll be working on the documents for this transaction. So that's the team that will be talking to you here, I think, very briefly this evening. So let me turn it over to TW to take us through our first slide.
Before you get into the explanation, I will just confess, my fellow directors are a lot smarter than I am. So this is a fairly new financial instrument to me personally. So as you're explaining it, please consider that your audience, myself especially, may not be familiar with this kind of instrument. So explain it as if you're explaining it to like a 10-year-old.
We fully understand and
just because I want to understand as my colleagues how this instrument works. So thank you.
Absolutely, we appreciate that, and we already had that in mind. So TW.
Can I get myself unmuted there? Thanks, Joe, and Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thanks for having us. I will, as a shameless plug, say that I do a presentation which is sort of like a 101 on bonds and some other sort of background type stuff at a Virginia Economic Development conference, and I'm happy to send the link of that to Mr. Palco, and he can share it with you all. And I think they've got a lot of just materials on the website too, if you wanted to peruse that as well. It's where people who are first-time EDA members, go to get a background about, what did I sign up for? So, going to talk just a little bit today about the EDA's role here in the financing of the infrastructure improvements that Laszlo described. So as Laszlo said, the city is going to want to retain control over a lot of the land that's associated with the development, and that includes the land where the new city hall is going to be located. But the mechanism to pay for the upfront costs over time is going to be a lease back arrangement with the Economic Development Authority, and the financing of the costs will be done through the rental payments by the city under that financing over time. So, as Laszlo indicated, you need an upfront slug of money to pay for these costs in order to build the buildings, move the dirt, lay the road and the pipe and so forth. So there will be the EDA will issue lease revenue bonds under the forming statute for the EDA. The EDA has the authority to issue bonds for the types of facilities that are laid out in the Virginia Code, and they run the gamut of all sorts of things, but for our purposes, they include facilities that will be used by local governments. So this is sort of right in the wheelhouse of what you're statutorily authorized to do. So the bonds will be issued that will generate the sort of money that's necessary to make those infrastructure payments, and then those bonds will be paid back over time. And so the city will, subject to annual appropriation by the governing body, make rental payments to the EDA that will in turn be used to make the payments on the bond. So this lease-back arrangement is really to facilitate the financing of those infrastructure costs, as you're sort of paying for it over time. The EDA won't take title to the property. It's going to be in the name of the city. The city will retain just ownership of the dirt, so to speak, and the building. And for our purposes, the money really just passes through the EDA to the bondholders. The EDA is acting as a conduit here. So in the statute, the IDA Act, any bonds that an EDA issues have to be non-recourse to that EDA. So you are purely a conduit to facilitate the financing of those projects that are authorized in the Virginia Code, and that obviously includes these types of local government infrastructure projects. And so the bond documents will very explicitly say that the obligation of the EDA to make the payment on the bonds is subject to there being money made available by the city under the financing lease, and that's a requirement of the code. And the city's obligation under that lease is subject to annual appropriation by the governing body. So they're entering into, as Laszlo sort of alluded to, a sort of a lease purchase type of an arrangement where they're going to end up with title to these properties after the bonds are paid off at 30 plus years from now. So, and under Virginia law, those lease payments are not a debt of the locality either. So they're subject to annual appropriation and subject to annual payment. Now, the lease revenue bond structure is a fairly common one that gets used, as I think Joe indicated. The city's actually done one 10 or 11 years ago now, but Prince William uses this structure, Loudoun uses this structure, Fairfax uses a similar structure as well. It's pretty common from all your neighboring jurisdictions to do these types of financing. It's fairly, and Joe and Jimmy can get in the weeds on this, but fairly understood and accepted in the market, and so that component of it, they're not going to have to go educate bondholders on what we're doing. They're pretty familiar with the Virginia lease revenue bond financing. So I'll sort of pause right there just to see if there are any questions sort of at a 10,000-foot view about the EDA's role in it and what your responsibility or lack thereof, for better words, is with respect to the bond.
How and where are the bonds sold?
So these bonds are going to be sold as what's called a negotiated sale, meaning that there will be the city has selected an underwriting team that's going to go out and market and sell the bonds. And I'll stop there because that's more Joe and Jimmy's bailiwick. I think they're going to get to that as we go through the slides.
This is Jimmy Sanderson. Good to see you. Why don't we flip to the next page, Laszlo, and Mr. Chairman, we'll start to talk about that process that the question was asked about. So TW laid out, I think, the structure. I mean, the general takeaway is that when we talk to EDAs, in particular, whether it's new members or a newly formed EDA, the big takeaway there is you're facilitating a transaction for the jurisdiction that you're a part of, more or less, through the EDA, and that the obligations that you have are set out in the documents, and the vast majority of those obligations are simply assigned to other financing participants, and some of which we'll talk about on this page. And to the extent that the city were to ever fail to make an appropriation to pay their lease payments, again, as TW said, that obligation would not fall, as it's precluded by statute to fall to the EDA. So we want to make sure everybody is assured that in no way is there an obligation of the EDA financially or to take care of the facility from a capital perspective going forward as well. So this page lists the participants that you may see, and as we've laid it out, you've got the role on the left and the entity on the right. But the lessee in this case is the city of Manassas Park. The lessor is the EDA, and that's what TW was talking about between the lease-back type transaction that allows us to have ultimately the lease payment come from the city to the EDA, and that's used to pay for the bonds. The EDA will be the issuer of the bonds that are the lease revenue bonds that go to the public, again, supported by that lease revenue payment. We are financial advisor to the city. We have a fiduciary obligation to look out for the city's best interest. As Joe mentioned, we've been doing that for a number of years. Joe obviously is the primary advisor to the city, but we're working as a group in that matter. Bond counsel to the city, that's McGuire Woods. Their role is really to make sure that the transaction is set up under Virginia law correctly, as well to ensure that where appropriate, there's going to actually be a tax exempt and a taxable component to this transaction. The vast majority of it will be tax exempt, but bond counsel's role is also to ensure that the piece that's tax exempt would be found tax exempt under federal tax law. The entities that are going to actually sell the bonds to the public, and we're going to go through a timeline for you that sort of lays out the major events that you'll see. But the underwriters of the transaction are NW Capital. They're the senior manager of the transaction, and we have a co-manager involved as well, and that's Raymond James. So those will be the two entities that when we as a group put together an offering document that will be used to market these bonds to the public. NW Capital and Raymond James will be the ones that go out and secure the orders and ultimately will place the EDA's bonds, again, that are supported by the lease revenue payments in investors' hands. Underwriters Council is Hunt and Andrews Kurth, also another large Virginia firm like McGuire Woods. They are counsel to the underwriters. One of their jobs is to make sure that we follow all the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the disclosures that are made in the documents are appropriate to the ultimate investors. And as Leslie laid out, the developer in this case is Norton Scott. So let's flip to the next page, and this will give you a sense of what you can expect to see.
Jimmy?
Yes.
Before we jump into that, I think we inadvertently left off, and this came up last night with the governing body, we inadvertently left off one participant in the transaction, and that would be the role of the trustee. Would you cover that briefly?
Sure. Yeah, the trustee is an important role. In this case, it's going to be U.S. Bank. They're a third-party trustee, separate apart from all of the other entities that are involved in the transaction. They're the ones that are going to handle all of the money. So when we sell the bonds, the funds won't be deposited with the EDA. They will be deposited with the city. They're going to be deposited with this third-party trustee who will hold the funds in escrow to be requisitioned for the construction of the building. They're also the entity that will receive the lease revenue payments from the city. So the EDA and all of the documents that TW is drafting, the EDA will assign its rights to receive those lease revenue payments to the trustee as that third party. So again, you're not receiving money and then having to pay it out. You've got no obligation or responsibility to do that. It's already delegated and assigned pursuant to the legal documents. Thank you, Joe. So from a timing perspective and sort of what you'll see, we met with the city council last night, gave this same presentation. Laszlo similarly gave a presentation about the project, but we wanted them to understand exactly what the roles that the city had and the roles that the EDA had going forward. So we met with them last evening, and we're going to have coming up a few more meetings that are going to take place. So in February, we have another city council meeting, and at that meeting, city council will be asked to approve a resolution that's going to authorize the execution of the legal documents, as well as the approval of the issuance of the lease revenue structure within certain parameters. So they're going to limit our ability to go out and execute this transaction to a certain size, meaning a maximum borrowing amount, as well as a maximum interest rate, and a final maturity on the lease revenue structure. So all of those will be delegated to us by the governing body, and we will then have the ability, once the EDA considers it the next evening, we will have the ability to go out and execute transaction only within those parameters that are set forth. So they're very limiting, and the documents that will really govern the transaction will all be approved at those meetings in substantially final form, because we won't have all of the details related to the specific interest rates, et cetera. But all those documents will be laid out, and that approval, again, will take place on February 2nd. A fairly important timing structure for EDAs, not just you, but all of them, is to make sure that you're acting really at the, not the behest, but the request of the governing body. So that the city council acting before you then have comfort that they're on board for this transaction, and you're not being asked to approve a transaction that the city council isn't supportive of. So we set it up with the EDA meeting on February 3rd. Again, you would have you would be considering a resolution again to authorize the execution and the issuance of those lease revenue bonds. Again, all within the statutory, not statutory, but the resolution parameters that were adopted by City Council the night before. Another important part of this is the rating. Again, we're looking at a process trying to get the interest rate as low as we can for the city, and so we have rating meetings set up for early February. And I'm gonna pause here for a minute, since Joe again is the day-to-day contact with the city, and let him just hit a little bit on the rating process and what that entails from that perspective.
Sure, thank you, Jimmy. So when you do a public transaction of lease revenue bonds, you typically go out and have those bonds rated, because the better the credit rating, the lower the interest rate, the lower cost of capital, the lower the resulting lease purchase payments that are made going forward. The city does have outstanding credit ratings on its own general obligation bonds. It's rated by 2 of the 3 national credit rating agencies, and carries ratings of AA- from Standard & Poor's and A1 from Moody's Investors Service. By comparison, the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States government are rated AAA. That's the highest rating you can get. The average rating nationally for cities and most counties is right where you are. So your ratings are very sound, particularly for a small city. And these lease revenue bonds are very much understood by the rating agencies. They see them all the time. As is alluded to, they typically carry a 1 rating notch distinction. And by notch, I mean a rating category typically has 3 levels to it. In the world of Standard & Poor's, it's AA minus, AA, AA plus. So 1 notch down would be single A plus. Again, still a very solid rating. And if it was 1 notch off of Moody's, it would be an A2 rating. Both of those are very solid investment grade ratings and will allow the lease revenue bonds to be sold at very attractive rates. Your role in the rating process is little to none. I mean, you can't sit in on a rating call. It's sort of a silent, interested party. I think that's something that you probably want to run by the city in terms of if you want to participate. But what the rating agencies are really looking at is the city's financial wherewithal to make the lease purchase payments that are part of the financing agreement. So there's really not a direct role for the EDA in that process. As I said, we will go and talk to these folks on February 9th. We are in the process of updating a credit presentation that we did a year and a half ago for the city when it refinanced some of its own bonds, and we'll use that document to complete that process. And again, we're looking at the financial wherewithal of the city. We're looking at the city's economy, both locally and regionally. They're looking at the city's debt profile and sort of the management acumen of the city. Those are the main drivers of the credit rating. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of that if I could, or I'd kick it back to Jimmy.
So I am curious, and Jimmy, you may address this, but just kind of a general question. So let's just say that 100 bonds are issued. It's just a fictitious number. What's the typical sales rate of bonds? Like what would you expect to get back? So if like I said, we release 100 bonds for sale, how many get bought typically? Like what percentage of them bought?
Yeah, so good question. So when we do these transactions, it's all or none. So we're going to go out in a marketing period. And let's flip to the next slide, Laszlo. And Mr. Chairman, I'll get right to that when we hit on the sale. I'll go into a little bit more detail on how the sale works for you. After the rating process, we go through. We'll receive ratings back from the credit rating agencies. Again, it's fairly easy process when we know what the existing ratings are with Manassas Park, and we know what the structure is. We've got an essential asset that's going to be important to the city, so we're fairly confident on where that rating will come out. But we'll receive that in late February. We have one more city council meeting in March, and at that meeting we will be presenting. Plaza will be presenting the final budget for the project, so we'll know what the costs are going to be to complete the project, and that makes our borrowing much more tighter. So we don't be borrowing the amount that we need for the project. In early March, when the lease revenue bonds are sold, again, NW Capital and Raymond James are going to be charged with taking our offering document that we put together. That offering document describes the structure that we have in the transaction, the credit ratings, and really the details and the quality of Manassas Park. They will take that and they will begin to market it, and that may be for a week, maybe a little over a week. That offering document will be out in the public, and they will be talking to investors during that time, where the investors will be doing their own credit review and determining whether they want to participate just purely from a credit perspective. Do they approve this type of transaction? Again, these are very well-known types of transactions. Virginia, just as a general rule, is a high credit quality state. As compared to pick at New York or the Northeast, where they have a lot worse issues up there from a fiscal standpoint. Virginia is considered very strong. So they will start lining up all the investors, and then we'll pick a day to price the bonds. And we've got it just plugged in here for early March, but we'll pick, let's just say it's a Wednesday. Wednesday will be the day that we're gonna price the bonds. And again, understanding that those underwriters have gone out and they've already talked to investors, and they've got a pretty good sense of who's interested. So they will go out on that Wednesday and say, we're going to make available these bonds, and they're all going to be done by specific maturities. So going out from, starting in 2025, bonds will start to mature all the way out for 30 years. And investors will start to put firm interest on which maturities they're interested in at what interest rates. So the underwriters will have said, the 2030 maturity is going to be a 3% coupon yielding 2.5%. And then it's just a question of, do they have enough orders to fill that specific year? And you're going to have that going up and down the entire, what we call the yield curve, for all of the maturities of the bonds. It's not just one bond and one interest rate. We structure them so that each year going out, it's a little bit of a different interest rate. And usually, if you think about it, interest rates in the earlier years are lower, and then they start to go up over time. Luckily, in the world that we're in today, interest rates across the board are depressed, very low and very attractive. And we've had lots of municipal borrowers go out and take advantage of this because, frankly, over the last few months, interest rates have been lower than they have almost ever been. So that's a very good time to borrow in the market. So the underwriters will go through this process for most of one morning, and they will be getting these firm bids back. We'll be talking to them throughout that process. Our firm happens to have an underwriting desk too, so we get a lot of sort of timely feedback from them what the market currently is. And the underwriters will come back to us and say, okay, we have orders for, I'm just going to make this up, we have orders for 90% of all of the bonds. There's 10% that we don't have specific orders for. And what will typically happen, what will always happen in our transactions, either they will say, we're willing to underwrite that 10% of bonds at the prices that we're selling these other bonds at, and they take on the liability of having to sell them over the next few days. Or they will say, well, the market maybe is a little bit tight. We want to go back and keep marketing and try to sell that last 10%. And that happens sometimes when maybe there's a lot of transactions in the market. But almost always we will come to a point during that morning and that day that either the underwriters will say, we've sold all the bonds, we have a home for all of them, or we have a home for 90% of the bonds, and we are going to underwrite, which is why we call them underwriters. They underwrite those bonds, and they agree to buy them themselves. And from that date, we have another 2 weeks until we close. And what will often, 99.99% of the time, those underwriters will work those bonds off after the pricing date and before the closing date. So we would expect on that early March date that we would have either all the bonds sold or the underwriters would agree to buy the remaining bonds themselves and sell them off later. At that day, that Wednesday, we will know exactly what the interest rate is on the bonds through maturity. So these are fixed rate bonds through to maturity. The interest rates won't change for the city unless they were to decide at some point in the future to refund them or refinance them at a lower interest rate. The interest rate on those bonds won't change. They're fixed rate for the life of the bonds. So we know where the interest rate is set in. At that point, we'll enter into a contract. It's called a bond purchase contract. And TW, jump in if I'm wrong, but the EDA is a party to that, along with the city and the underwriters. And we agree that these are going to be the interest rates. And that's when we've got 2 weeks plugged in from that pricing date until we close on the transaction. And that's just time for the lawyers to get the documents in place, put all the numbers that we agreed to on that Wednesday pricing date, put those in the documents, and frankly get things signed. And the world we're in now, sometimes that takes a little bit longer to actually get things fully executed. So we give them that time to do that. But the interest rates won't change. If rates in the market go up for whatever reason after the pricing date and before closing, the interest rates would still be locked in for the city. So let me stop there.
Question. Hearing the explanation of all this, our role as the EDA, it sounds like 3 February is the key meeting for us for phase 1 of the development. Do we have any activity regarding phase 1 after 3 February? Or are we just waiting for the next phase? I don't see us having much active involvement after 3 February, at least based on what I've heard so far. Over.
Yeah, so I guess Jimmy and Joe can add to what I have to say, but at least from a city perspective. So sometime, likely in your March meeting or April meeting, I'll go over with you all kind of what the final budget looks like that kind of drove the final total bond amount that was issued. So again, that's just kind of another follow-up information item for your all's purposes. For phase 1B, you're absolutely right, and even the larger kind of phase 4 development, there isn't a direct role from the EDA from a city perspective beyond kind of those things that we're going to want to talk about in our charter review from the EDA, kind of the marketing aspect of the potential role that the EDA can play in supporting business development in our city. And then maybe Joe or if you can kind of add what else kind of the EDA's responsibility is post February 3rd.
But it really boils down to 3 February, our role, as far as this development project goes.
That's the key. Yeah, that is the key date. Yep.
So we don't want to miss that meeting.
Yeah, well, let's
And we need the chairman to sign stuff before closing, but yes.
Okay, so there is some activity afterwards, but it's basically just signing off on something. Okay. That's what I figured. So then there'd be I don't understand, I guess I'll be subject of other meetings, what this marketing stuff might be about. But there are other phases coming, correct?
Yeah, within this development is called the phase 3. I know it's very, very complex. I'm going to go over that in the next presentation that I make, but within this phase 3 development, there's phase 1A and phase 2. Actually, phase 1A, phase 1B, and phase 2. To complicate it even further, what you're talking about tonight, the majority of the public components are part of phase. Or actually, all the public components are part of phase 1A and phase 1B, and that's essentially what the action you're going to take. There's no additional public components that are part of phase 2, but the action that you're going to take on February 3rd is what covers phases 1A and phase 1B. From a larger downtown development process for phase 4, for example, which is across the street from here, adjacent to Park 170, which is a separate developer. It's not a public-private partnership. There's not a direct kind of public component to that development like there is here with the City Hall and associated infrastructure. So there is no role similar in terms of like a lease revenue bond structure for the phase 4 development like there is for phase 3. And again, it transforms into a different type of role that we're going to explore as we kind of move beyond this first critical step here of the role of the EDA.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's the end of the presentation related to the lease revenue structure. Again, happy to answer any questions that you may have, and hopefully we were able to put it in terms that those that don't deal with this on a daily basis can understand clearly. So again, happy though to delve into anything further that you'd like.
Thank you. I'll give the EDA members an opportunity to ask any questions at this time. All right. Okay, seeing none. Joe, Jimmy, TWs, thank you so much for your presentations tonight. Thank you. They were so at this point, the next item of business is the city manager will return for another presentation featuring the downtown development. And at this time, Mr. Palco, do we want to allow TW, Jimmy, and Joe to be dismissed, or would we like to have them remain as you talk through this?
I don't think it's necessary for them to remain. They're welcome to. This is, again, another long presentation. But if you don't have any kind of further questions, and you can always follow up with emails to me as well for any additional clarifications, but I don't think it's necessary. So Joe, TW, Jimmy, feel free to drop off or feel free to stick around.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a great evening. Great. So, Mr. Chair and members of the EDA, what I want to go over, so in my first presentation, I talked about the kind of the why and the what for the public component of the public-private partnership, right? So why were we doing this, kind of what the unfunded capital liabilities were for the city from a public component, right? And therefore, kind of one of the reasons why, the major reasons why we were pursuing the downtown development in the first place to satisfy those public components, and that's what we just finished talking about with the whole lease revenue bond structure as well. What I want to talk about more in this presentation is kind of that secondary goal that we had as a city, which was to support our economic development strategy for the city, which, you know, goes beyond the downtown, but the downtown is the critical piece that's going to help the city financially and economically going towards the future before we start exploring kind of what else can be done across the city. So that's what I want to go over right now, is the why from the secondary goal of economic development and financial improvement for the city. So before that, a lot of these slides were taken from a governing body retreat, since some of them have been updated, not all, but that we held about 3 years ago when we first kind of analyzed what our goals were, what the new governing body's goal were back then 3 years ago. And we're going to hold likely another retreat here in the next month. We don't actually go anywhere. We did it at the police station last time, and that's likely where we'll do it again. But to kind of update, is there still a shared vision of what the goals are for the governing body and the community going forward? But here, before we even got into goals, I presented to the governing body what the challenges were that were kind of prohibiting us from achieving kind of like the larger aspirations that we have as a community for service delivery goals, tax rates, debt, all those things were covered. And a key component of that was discussion of kind of the economic challenges that we were facing, how that was having a negative fiscal impact for the city, and then what is the strategy going forward to ameliorate some of the issues that we're talking about here. So kind of from a broad perspective, what we're facing and what we were facing is some of the things we've addressed already over the last few years. But the lack of downtown development, there had been a past effort to get the downtown developed. Timing was horrible, where the project was completed and the Great Recession happened. So it was just horrible timing, and that's not the fault of the people back then. No one foresaw kind of the Great Recession coming back in 2008. But also kind of just how that development was planned was not kind of a professional planned economic development strategy, and I'll kind of go over what some of the issues were there. But that's what was setting the city back. There was a lot more to it for kind of why we saw some failure across the street, namely kind of the ownership structure as well. But it ended up creating kind of a black eye for the city and concern from developers and the business community about doing further investment in our city. So that was a huge roadblock that we were encountering when we started looking at this 3 years ago, when I was brought on to when I was hired by the governing body. Lack of restaurants, the share kind of our city, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like compared to other jurisdictions from a meals tax perspective, and why restaurants are a critical component, but especially for smaller cities and towns, is because restaurants are taxed more than any other type of business, because they have the real estate tax, which they contribute to, the business license tax, which they contribute to, sales tax, and then meals tax, which is the meals tax is specific to restaurant so that they add as kind of a share of their kind of numbers, they add a lot more of a revenue base to help out the community. And equally or more importantly, a lot of the restaurants, that there are people coming from outside the city. So essentially you're taxing non-residents to help the tax base of your residents to alleviate their tax rates. That's the beauty of kind of, destination dining restaurant establishments. And we just don't have a robust kind of restaurant infrastructure in our city. We want to turn that around, and the downtown is going to be the biggest component of that. Age light industrial park, the Connor Center industrial park was a great initiative of the city in the 80s. They were facing similar kind of financial issues in the late 70s and early 80s, kind of what we were dealing with here. And they had some forward-looking leaders there that looked at that industrial park as a way to help the tax base out, and it was quite successful. But that was a long time ago, right? It's starting to. There's a lot of aging infrastructure there. The returns as kind of a proportion for your tax base have continuously gone down. So that's kind of something that we have to look for in the future. So we're not ready yet, but that is something we have to keep in the back of our mind for what can be done to kind of revitalize that industrial park. An age shopping center along Route 28. So Route 28, the traffic volume there, which is a critical component for commercial success, just dwarfs other routes, even Liberia Avenue, especially that intersection of Manassas Drive and Route 28. So there's a strong potential in terms of vehicle counts there for commercial, but there's a lot of kind of infrastructure challenges with kind of the transportation network that set that back. But we do have a shopping center there. There hasn't been a lot of reinvestment into that shopping center to kind of modernize it and bring in kind of a more modern mix of businesses as well. So the performance of that from a revenue standpoint is perhaps not as strong as it could be. Again, that's more of a longer term project, post downtown. But again, it's something that it's a challenge that we face, and it's something that we have to keep in the back of our mind. Lack of office business revenue that you'll have in places like Herndon and other parts of Northern Virginia that have a more robust kind of office environment. Office, even pre-COVID, was kind of being downsized in general from the private sector. With COVID, it's happening further. So the office market in the DC metro area is probably oversupplied at this point. Doesn't mean that there isn't additional office construction happening, because there may be more strategic areas that business want to go to, but there's a lot more office vacancies in the metro area than other types. So getting offices is always going to be a challenge. However, the recent trend the last 5-10 years is that offices like to locate in town center areas, kind of mixed use development. So that's, again, the critical component of the downtown. If we ever want to be successful in attracting more robust office usage, really two aspects of that, right? Having a successful town center, and then the long-term BRE infrastructure to kind of increase kind of the back and forth movement of the BRE as Amazon HQ takes off, and the bridge infrastructure improvements are done between Arlington and DC to enable more trains. Those are going to be the critical elements, because offices, again, they want to be in town centers and they want to be near kind of more of that metro style infrastructure, which again, the BRE has the potential to become with Amazon HQ2 and kind of expanded infrastructure for the BRE as well. So those are kind of but for right now, we're very limited in terms of office options, employment opportunities for our city from our location, Prince William, and a lot of them try to get offices. We're not as successful as those that are kind of closer to the Beltway and inside the Beltway as well, because of location. And then lack of market data. When I joined, there just wasn't kind of the robust kind of market analytics that you would want to see kind of what's actually viable in terms of development and kind of design recommendations from a professional perspective as well. You can see we knocked that out. We partnered with a couple of firms to kind of give us their perspective on the data of kind of supply and demand curve for retail and restaurants, what the capacity was for us to kind of take on additional supply for that, and then kind of concepts for where to focus kind of those retail areas and kind of design and other elements that kind of help guide what we're doing right now. And right now, again, the major focus is the downtown and kind of building that restaurant infrastructure. The reason why for our downtown we're going more towards kind of a dining and entertainment strategy is because the market's already oversaturated. You have a lot of grocers in this region. Doesn't mean you can't have more grocers, but you're not creating kind of a competitive advantage with other areas just by adding a grocer to our downtown. You're not really bringing in kind of that tapping into kind of those other markets that we're looking to do to make this downtown more successful. So we want to become kind of that modern town center dining entertainment venue for kind of the markets that I'll go over here in a little bit. So restaurants are a key component again because they're as a share of kind of volume, they provide a lot greater returns from an income standpoint to the city. It's a city center now called Park 170. Quickly kind of going over some of the issues, and I'll just kind of open these up. This was a slide I presented a few years ago, and the ownership structure for that property was not good for the longest time. So the previous owners were pushing away businesses who were interested in actually leasing spaces there because they wanted to wait the city out and be able to convert it all into residential. So they pushed away businesses that we've engaged with that were actually more interested in going in there. Just they had an active owner who was kind of pushing them away, and that was a huge challenge. And fortunately, a couple years ago now, a year and a half ago, they sold it to a new ownership group who is 100% on board with getting it leased. However, the damage has been done, right? There's now a question, there's a fear from most businesses about being that first to invest in there after it's been vacant for so long. And so there's been, beyond the two reports that I did, there was an extra consulting report for the ownership structure of Park 170 for kind of what was the issue there. And it's just reiterated a lot of things that I had briefed the governing body during my interviews, that you just don't plan that much kind of retail space to be built without having a plan for who's your anchor, right? What's that, either, small grocer or entertainment venue or destination restaurant that's going to be pulling people to that area, and then to have kind of positive spillover effects for the other businesses in that area. And this was an independent consultant report that kind of confirmed that. Parking is the major issue here as well. In general, kind of shortage of parking, which again, why the garage is such an important feature to introduce to our downtown, plus all that additional parking infrastructure that we're getting as part of the downtown, the phase 3 development, but also where's the parking situated, right? So if you look at this map here, this parking lot in front of City Hall is supposed to be servicing the retail here, which is fine if you have kind of a robust, active town center that is, that has an anchor, that's become walkable, that has a good plaza, where you have events and things like that. Okay, but from building this from scratch, that was never going to work. Businesses that, when I met with them, they weren't interested in kind of being the first to invest in here, but kind of parking not being the best parking for retail and restaurants are going to be parking right in front of their business, right? So that customers can just pull right in and then walk straight in and not have to walk a lot, right? Second is at least adjacent, right? So you don't have to kind of cross a major street to kind of access. So that was one of the things that we had to identify early on. You can see with kind of these red boxes, is ideally you wanted to have some kind of adjacent parking infrastructure to enable this retail to be successful. The good news was that their market report kind of just reiterated kind of the other analytics that we saw, that it wasn't a market reason why this failed. It was all these other things that I was explaining to you, kind of which of course they didn't, talk about the ownership structure in this, because it was that owner who actually charted this analysis right before they sold the property. But the parking infrastructure, the anchor tenant, they also talked about kind of visibility, so kind of the wrong trees, right, that block your storefronts, which is not something you want to do when you want to have successful retail and restaurants. You don't want to be blocking the storefront. You want those to be more visible. So there was a lot of non-market oriented reasons why it failed, and that was kind of good news, right? It's like you have these independent firms kind of confirming kind of our suspicion of what was going on there, and it meant we had a chance to kind of turn this around. It meant we had a lot of work to do, unfortunately, because again, this isn't the best design for start kicking off a town center, and so we kind of have to work around it, and we have to do a lot of things to improve it. And there's an agreement with the current owner as well for parking that kind of makes this all a lot more complicated. I won't go into the details there, but just know that there's a lot of other things that happen in the background that have to be negotiated, that have to be kind of worked around because of the legacy of what this brought to our city. Why is this important? I talked earlier about restaurants, and I'll just kind of go over kind of generic kind of what's wrong with, what's the issue with not having kind of robust restaurant and commercial portfolio as a community. And what this slide was showing, at least for FY18, kind of a ratio, proportion, the population of these specific revenue sources as a share of population. You can see with our peers in our surrounding areas, we have the worst ratio, right? So we may have more revenue than like Occoquan, let's say, as a dollar amount, but the ratio from a population perspective, we're not performing nowhere near as good as Occoquan. The next lowest is going to be Manassas, which just signals that in general, this is kind of a weaker market than as you go further out east, but at least we can at least aspire to kind of get closer to that Manassas ratio. Definitely not for BPOL because of their Micron investment, but at least for kind of the restaurant and other kind of generic retail entertainment style portfolio, we want to get that ratio up. So we just, for example, got to the Manassas ratio, which is the next lowest performer in the Northern Virginia area. We generate about in FY18 an additional kind of $1 million to our tax base, which is equivalent to I want to say about 5 cents on the tax rate, right? Just right there, we're just kind of improving, getting to that ratio. You start adding kind of additional revenues to help our tax base out. The story is the same thing for sales tax. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can see kind of where we're at with sales tax as a share. Again, we're missing out kind of an additional $1 million, just kind of trying to get closer to that Manassas ratio. BPOL, we won't get their numbers have increased dramatically. That's why they were able to actually reduce taxes because of the new Micron investment. So we're not going to catch Manassas anymore, but at least pre-Micron expansion, we at least want to kind of get closer to that ratio as well for the business taxes as well, generate some additional revenue. And that discussion I had with the governing body, that was a combined, where I was showing kind of our revenue deficits from a tax-based perspective, from a commercial standpoint, and what we could accrue with a successful downtown development from a tax-based perspective. And I combined that with reducing our debt, what we were spending every year on debt above the next highest jurisdiction's debt portfolio. And the combined amount was kind of the light at the end of the tunnel that we can become a lot financially, much stronger financial position as a community if we kind of did that dual track of reducing our debt. We did some major debt refinancing and kind of controlling and allowing the debt, the position to drop over the next year dramatically, combined with a robust downtown development strategy. We were going to turn around the city's finances, and that was kind of part of that strategy that we wanted to adopt, the reasons for that strategy. So with the strategy, kind of the overall, and then we'll go specifically into the downtown, we kind of came up with kind of a generic kind of prioritization where we knew we wanted to focus on the downtown, what we called the city center, the phases 3 and 4 first, right? And I'll go over kind of explaining why phases 3 and 4 were so important, with the goal of trying to wrap that up, really start the investment or the development FY22 likely to be done by FY25 to kind of help out with our financial position, and looking even beyond, kind of what are the options for additional phases as well, assuming that the phases 3 and 4 are successful in turning around kind of the downtown position and restructuring our overall market reach. Priority number 2, once we're kind of done with that, but even in the interim, we can kind of explore options for how we want to redevelop the Route 28 corridor. We do own a piece of property there. There is some interest in kind of certain redevelopment there as well. So it is something that we look at, but again, the downtown is going to be the priority. We don't have an economic development department. We don't have an economic development coordinator, so I take those responsibilities on along with my other city manager functions. So we don't have the bandwidth to kind of take on multiple projects at once. And then again, the light industrial redevelopment, we're not really there yet. We know we need to do some infrastructure improvements, certainly, but we also likely in the future want to bring in another consultant to kind of review what the options are for the light industrial track as well. But we're not there yet. There's still, it's still not completely kind of that old that it's fully ready for redevelopment. Kind of the next kind of 2 or 3 elements that are critical for successful economic development, kind of attracting the businesses and the development community to invest in your community and establish their businesses. So working on kind of that business attraction strategy, kind of what are the tools that I need to have when I meet with businesses, with developers, right? Using kind of that consultant data as well as a key component for having been able to recruit these developers like we did. And now in my discussion with businesses to kind of get them excited about the city and get them to commit to the city as well. And then in the future, small business development as well, because there is that interest from the community. We hear it all the time, people looking to kind of start up their own business. And we're engaging with one right now as well to do that, because that's going to be an important part of any downtown as well. And then just kind of the generic marketing, especially kind of what we call the tourism marketing. But it's really just, when you talk about tourism, we're talking about outside the city, right? It's our trade. What we're exporting essentially is trying to bring people from outside of our city to come here and dine here and give us their economic benefit and tax revenues to us. But to do that, you have to do some pretty robust marketing of your product as well, and partner with your downtown elements to market that, and to do events, which is the next piece to really help drive that awareness and that marketing for the community. And then the potential to use incentives as well to help kind of solidify these deals, such as the big one that we'll be looking at is the Arts District, to help kind of lock in the deal with the movie theater, which essentially allows for kind of a tax break structure for them to kind of induce an anchor to commit to the city as well. And again, using the EDA structure. So we had talked about creating the EDA a few years ago. Now we're there. Thank you all very much for volunteering. So we've got to that point of having the EDA being able to utilize things like a lease revenue bond structure for the developer versus the developer kind of needing to secure private, non-tax exempt bonds to kind of finance these things, and then our lease payments would go up dramatically for that. Again, we're not really pushing a robust events and tourism strategy right now because we don't have the product, right? We don't have the downtown to kind of attract people to. So that's really kind of the next step once the downtown is built to kind of make that successful. And then again, as we start building an economic development staff, they're the ones who are really going to take the lead in kind of that small business development program. We can do some basic things, but until you have someone dedicated to that, you can't really have a robust program for that purpose. That's the overarching strategy. Any questions before I start going to go into the details on the downtown?
I had this vague recollection that not too many years ago, I don't know how to phrase this, there was a incentive, like a small business set aside, and I think a section of the city of Manassas Park was designated as preferred. I don't know what I'm talking about. It was like for small businesses, but disadvantaged businesses. And there were these zones, economic zones that were set aside, and I guess you'd call it the west side of the city was in that zone. We had that zone for small businesses. I don't know whatever happened to that. I know I'm not dreaming this. This did happen.
Was that like a hub zone? You talking about the hub zone?
Something like, yeah, you may know that better. Because I thought that never got advertised. Nobody talked about it. And that was like, what?
Yeah.
For bringing contracts in, government contracts. Over.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the hub zone, there's a separate kind of incentive that also discuss the downtown, but the hub zone, so it's the west side of the city for the Census Bureau tract that was designated as a hub zone. SBA supported small businesses, government contracts. To your point, we do have one business that's on the west side that qualifies for that hub zone. The problem is that there's no real office, infrastructure
at your house,
and no real demand for that. The businesses just want to be interested in doing that there. What I believe was tried by the city, and this may have been before my time, was to kind of extend that census tract designation and bring the downtown within that to then be able to attract office. But I don't think that was ever feasible, and it just wasn't done. So we don't get a lot of benefit, unfortunately, from the hub zone. There is the the economic, there was a newer program implemented over the last few years, but we kind of missed the boat on applying for that as well. There was an incentive program established, and Dean, if you're on, maybe you can provide additional background. I want to say 10 years ago, that did try to incentivize investment by developers or businesses to locate within the city, tech companies, defense companies, developers to do mixed-use development. And it essentially involved tax breaks, so it was kind of strategically targeted based off of the types of businesses that we wanted. But it was kind of like I explained to the governing body, these incentives they don't bring the business to the table. They really just, if you're market worthy and the business is looking at your community along with others and you're competing with other communities for bringing them in, they're an extra tool in that negotiation process. But if you don't have the market demand for something, the business just isn't going to come. And that was with the downtown as well, where they had an incentive structure where if your mixed-use development was 60% commercial and 40% residential, and there was all these tax breaks. No developer was interested in doing that. They wanted to completely flip that ratio, get it up more closer to like 75%, 80% residential, 25%, 20% commercial, and then all of our consultants confirmed, yeah, that's your market capacity, is that ratio what your businesses want. So no one bid on that tax incentive. They wanted to invest in what was market viable, which was that ratio that I discussed, that 20 to 25% commercial versus 75 to 80% residential, to kind of cushion their risk in the investment and match kind of the economic viability. And that's exactly what happened. That's where we got developers to bite, and we ended up changing our zoning a little bit to provide that as an option, but you don't get any incentives if you develop 20% commercial versus the rest residential. You can only get the incentives by doing the 60% commercial, 40% residential. But again, no one's interested in that because the market just doesn't support that at this point. So you got to be market viable. Incentives are just critical for helping to close deals, but businesses won't invest if there's no market viability in the first place. They don't just bring in businesses there. So that's kind of the issue, unfortunately, with kind of incentive structures. They don't help necessarily bring businesses that won't be interested because of market viability.
Is the hub zone dead?
I think it's dependent on the 2020 census. I think that's what's going to determine whether to continue or not. Yeah.
Does the city have any say in this or any influence over it, or is it just luck of the draw?
I'm not as involved. I know that the business on the other side of the city, they are, but I honestly think it's just a census decision.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay, so going into kind of the market area for our downtown, again, the retail kind of supply versus demand, capabilities really focus on that blue area that you see here on the map. It was called kind of the primary market area for the city. And just kind of for reference, this right here is kind of the city center area, the city hall. You have the Bloom Crossing development, and then Signal Hill Park, and some of the Caden Ridge, kind of the newer county developments as well. That's really kind of our primary market area for the city center, and that's what the analytics primarily focus on, to be extremely conservative. Secondary market, and then when you look at the blue market, this is kind of what we tell businesses, right? You have nearly 5,000 residential units, and you'll have 5.6 thousand by FY25, and kind of median incomes, just to show what exists in the primary market, because that's going to be their first question always, is kind of what's the kind of the number of residential units of population and income levels when they're making their decision to invest. That's kind of step one. The secondary area is going to be in these red areas, so a big chunk of kind of the western side, half of our city, kind of pieces of the Yorkshire area as well, and then some of these kind of less dense kind of developments in the county area. And then the tertiary market is going to be this green area. I was going to show you kind of what the more viable. So when you look at, again, the VRE usage, who's coming to the VRE station, and also the heat map for the central library usage and also our community center, they align more with these components of the secondary and tertiary markets. That is our marketing portfolio. That is a marketing target that we're going to want to look at. So right now our analytics are based off this blue. If we want to be much more successful and drive up the strength of our tax base even more, our marketing has to be focused on these areas. This is where we're going to be able to attract additional users of the future downtown. You're not going to get, there's too much going on in this part of the tertiary market. You're just not going to be able to compete with those other developments. But these we know these people from this area already come to our city, so we want to more extensively market to that area to expand kind of the strength of our downtown. So it's kind of a portfolio that we present to businesses as well, kind of like a snapshot of what our downtown is. It's actually more expansive than even this picture, but for right now, we're more focused just on this area right now of the development. I'll go over kind of the different phases, but phase one was the Park 170, the initial or the original city center development done in the late 2000s. Phase two is kind of an ongoing project approved in 2013, again, using city land. Half of it's been developed. The second half is under site plan review right now from staff, but there's a lot of delays to that project. Phase three, we were talking about earlier, where the city hall, the Plaza, some of the other businesses, the VR Garage will be located, and then phase four, we'll talk about kind of what that is as well. But when these phases are completed, you're going to have just in this area about 1,200 residential units, over 2,000 parking spaces for the commercial purposes. And why that's important, as you can see, you're going to have roughly 250,000 square feet of commercial spaces. Your ratio, usually you want to be around 5 spaces for every 1,000 square foot. So we're going to be closer to around 8. So we're building kind of surplus parking finally in our downtown, so that parking will not be a reason for why businesses won't invest in our community. You can see the demand for traditional retail, so it's a much more limited definition of what traditional retail is. For example, like the bank, the movie theater, don't fall, gyms don't fall in that traditional retail. It's traditional kind of sales, and restaurants do fall under that. But you can see kind of the range of square footage demand, using, again, primarily that primary market area and a very, very, very small piece of the secondary market. So this number from a retail standpoint will only grow as we start tapping into those additional markets. And again, this doesn't include office. The office market, again, is just not that strong, but that's where having the town center helps us compete for kind of existing office use as their leases expire, kind of providing maybe a better office space in this kind of Prince William region ecosystem or market. But this is kind of the current demand and the vehicle counts for crossing through the city, and more importantly, kind of the marketing opportunities of what exists in the adjacent Route 28 that we're going to want to establish a significant marketing presence as well to kind of drive traffic to our city center on the weekends and evenings. Phase four, I'll go into more details, but you can see just from proximity, I showed you that older slide that showed this building and how we want to get parking kind of on both sides. Phase four starts that process. It builds kind of that parking lot adjacent to at least what's called Building B retail for Park 170, and really at least to help out this end cap a little bit as well. It's close enough to be able to support this component of Park 170, and it helps clear out some of these businesses that really dissuade retailers and restaurants from wanting to invest in our downtown. They just don't match kind of like it's almost like I hate to say it, but it's almost like a junkyard, visual there that just doesn't appeal to businesses and developers. But luckily, we partner with someone to help with that process of redeveloping this location to help advance downtown.
Does the city own that property or have any rights to the property, or need to obtain that property?
No, we're not obtaining it. So we own some of the property, a very small piece of it that we're including as part of this, as part of a sale agreement. But the majority of the properties are private that the developers has been acquiring themselves.
The developer's been acquiring it. Okay.
Yep. And that was the case also with phase three. The developer was able to acquire the majority of the private properties as well. It's just another view of the 4 different phases. And what we changed 3 years ago in terms of planning for the development is we wanted to establish goals for any additional development what's in it for the city, right? What's the goal of the city in approving new developments? And what we define as kind of the critical goals for these phases, for phase 3 being the most important, was the anchor, right? That was kind of addressed before, that you need an anchor when you're planning on building that amount of retail, 50,000 square feet of retail portfolio. You're going to want to have an anchor to help drive the success of that. The remaining kind of retail portfolio that the analytics say we can support, the new city hall, the public purpose, again, that we talked about, that we focused on earlier, the VRE garage location. So previously the VRE garage is going to be located up here, way too far from what the street corner area of where your restaurant and retail businesses are going to be the most successful, which is in this area. That's too far. That would be of no use from a commercial perspective. So what we want to do with phase 3 was, can we shift that garage close as possible to the commercial users to provide that support. Some additional commercial office mixed in with that development, and then what we call here, we were calling it a square before, really kind of that plaza, right? That pedestrian plaza for central community gathering, community events, to make it kind of match that modern town center feel that has that central gathering place, splash pad for kids and family, seating areas for outdoor dining, and for events as well. That was the goal, again, for phase 3. Again, phase 3 is the most important, and the reason why we had more goals for phase 3 is not just from this location, but that's where the remaining city-owned, the largest share of city-owned land was. So we had a much more larger stake in controlling kind of the results of the development as well. Phase 4 I just talked about is that phase 1 parking, clearing out this area to have it fit with the rest of this ecosystem, and to allow an amendment to the ground lease, again, that parking ground lease that the owner here has with the city as part of that development in the late 2000s that prevents us from doing a lot of this redevelopment. Phase 4, getting that parking lot, that's allowed me to now enter into negotiations with these owners to amend that ground lease to allow all of this to happen. And the negotiations have been going well. They are on board with getting this done. They're committed to kind of the vision of the downtown that we have. We just need to kind of get that finalized. But without phase 4, there was no way to do that. So that's why phase 3 and 4 kind of had to happen together to enable the success of the downtown. Looking beyond, as we looked at our city center redevelopment district, fall of 2019, when we were looking at kind of what the map should be, doesn't mean that any of this stuff is coming anytime soon. We kind of ended on 2 additional phases as potential, kind of phase 5 and 6, and we kind of laid out initial goals. And 5 is kind of the more critical one, where if we're successful with this downtown here and we have kind of a modern, successful town center, that's when grocers will come. That's when they'll actually, again, be interested in investing in our community, when you have a successful town center. Because again, there's a lot of grocers already in this region. You're going to want to have a grocer that offers kind of a different portfolio than what exists out here. But we've been engaging with them constantly. It doesn't mean we can't get a smaller one here in City Center, but really the majority of them are more interested, when this becomes successful, essentially come back and give us a call, and we'll re-engage on locating a grocer in your downtown. But we just want to kind of lay out what are the goals, what are the types of businesses, again, that bring people to the downtown. Sports complexes are another good use, ice skating rinks, things like that do help bring additional people to the community. So this is just kind of the start of, if there's additional interest from the development community to keep going, what should the goals of the city be for these developments? What are we getting out of it? We want to make sure that we're always focused on our goals as well.
2 things. What's 2? Is 2 Connor House?
No, phase 2. So I'll go over that right now. So looking at it from this location here, this is phase 2. It's behind the Park 170. So this is kind of what phase 1 and 2 are. I think you all know what phase 1 is. Right across the street from City Hall, you have 290 residential units, 49,000 square feet of retail. Phase 2 is half built. That's the 7-story apartment tower behind Park 170. It's called the Artena. And then there's a 17,000 square foot office building that was built behind that. It houses a Montessori school on the ground level, and on the top level houses our Department of Social Services, a 20-year lease for that. Then planned completion, this 2021 date is likely going to be 2023 now. There's just way too many delays in that project for me to have any confidence in their initial timeline, but they're going to build an additional 45,000 square foot office building and then an additional 110 apartment units similar to this as well. Again, this was an agreement that was done back in 2013 with the use of city land. We got a crack at least amending it slightly a couple years ago. We added some additional components, which I'll show you here. So they wanted to, this residential building was supposed to be an assisted living residential building. They wanted to change it to kind of, no age requirement there, which, we said, okay, if you want to do that, you're going to have to develop something else for us, right, to give us something else. So what they came up with, they went ahead and purchased this land. This is where the Yappy used to be. They went out of business now. It's a new vet clinic right across the street from Palisades. There's one kind of an undeveloped tract there. So they've acquired that land, the same developers here. They entered into an agreement with the All-American Steakhouse to build a steakhouse as part of that larger downtown ecosystem that we developed. Again, that was pre-COVID. Everything's been put on standstill right now with COVID, but that's kind of the addition that we got. And more importantly, what we got out of it as well is that they can't just build the residential and not build the office, right? So if we had allowed it to kind of just stay assisted living, technically they could just build the assisted living and then just keep delaying on the office, right? But we're getting these commercial components concurrently with the residential. Whereas, like, for example, the Palisades, they built the residential and then never built the commercial. We're restructuring our deals where things have to happen concurrently. So that means you don't get your building permit for your residential until you get it for your commercial components. You don't get occupancy for your residential until you get occupancy for your commercial as well. So you can build them concurrently, but approvals for one requires approval for other. This is phase 3. I'll just kind of open up the different components. You can see from a residential standpoint, you're talking about 2-over-2 condos, or they're referred to sometimes as stacked townhomes. Again, now the latest count is going to be 300 units built in 2 phases. This is kind of the phase 1A residential footprint and the phase 2. Again, this is why the developer was interested in this project, was this piece here, the residential. Look at vacancy rates for residential and the DC metro area compared to retail and office. It's a dramatic difference. The the residential market is extremely hot. It's very low risk, whereas kind of commercial investments are always going to have a lot higher risk. So to balance any investment, cushion their investments, developers always want to do residential as a big piece of everything else that they're doing. Again, I went over the garage previously. This commercial building C will be owned by Norton Scott, the developer. And again, we're targeting 2 restaurants for that. We already talked about the City Hall and the Plaza. But then again, the building B is supposed to be a mix of a movie theater, an additional restaurant. It was plural before, but we consolidated to 1 restaurant, and then office on top of the theater. Ultimately, what goes there is going to be decided by the anchor, right? If the anchor wants to be standalone and not have other businesses, well, we're going to cater to them. The key is to get the anchor. If they're fine with kind of the other, office and other investments there, then that's the goal, is to get all of that as part of this. The good thing is the parking ratios and everything are already structured for that full-on development, right? The additional restaurant, the additional offices. So if we don't go that route, again, we're just building additional surplus parking to ensure that the downtown is available. In terms of phasing, of course, we wanted this first, right? But where it fit really was on this property where our current City Hall is, and we weren't going to be able to operate without a City Hall. So we had to build a City Hall first, move over to the City Hall to then free up the land at the anchor. And the beautiful part about it was that the anchor that we're engaging with, their plan for entering the Northern Virginia market was not in line with kind of the early timeline of getting this built. It's more in line with the timeline for when now this building will be built, which is around 2024. That's their timeline for entering kind of the Northern Virginia market, with us being kind of their first location. So it actually matches very well with that strategy. I know there's a lot of concerns in the post-COVID-19 world, especially after Warner Brothers made their decision with HBO Max. So yes, kind of prior to that decision from Warner Brothers, there was a lot more confidence about theaters. With that decision, we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen with that, how successful they're going to be with their strategy, and to see kind of what the future is. There's likely still going to be theater infrastructures, but the traditional, movie and a popcorn will likely be consolidated, but kind of the Alamo Draft House style structure, which is exactly the type of business that we're talking about here, where it's a dining alcohol experience with a movie, and having more focus on blockbusters that just aren't the same watching at home. That's likely the future of kind of theater, the theater experience. So they're not going to completely go away, but your traditional kind of, sit down and watch a movie, those will likely be consolidated post this. We're still engaging with the theater. There's still interest. They went ahead and opened their Richmond theater still during COVID-19. So they're still making that progress. This is all dependent on the vaccine, and the vaccine being successful and out in mass for us to be able to move out of this COVID world as soon as possible, and to see what's going to happen with restaurants and theaters post COVID-19. So again, a little bit of bad luck in terms of timing here with this one, just like what happened back in the 2000s with the Great Recessions. But we're setting ourselves up for the best chance to be successful as possible with the infrastructure that we're building to support these investments.
What's the name of that company?
It's called Cinema Cafe. They're based out of southeastern Virginia. They have more than 10 theaters down there, and now they've just entered the Richmond area market.
Got it. Cinema Cafe. Okay.
Yeah, it's a mom and pop operation. It's not a corporate chain. And again, their revenue stream, when you look at compared to other theaters, like the Alamo is probably the same as there, where like the majority of their revenues are from food sales and alcoholic beverage sales, and not the actual theater tickets, right? It's overwhelmingly their food, because they're like Alamo, but they have like a little button in your seat, so more luxury seating. You have a little button in the seat that you can click, and a waiter will come, and you have a menu, and you can order food, with your movie, and alcoholic beverages as well. So if you can go check out their New Richmond one, I'd recommend that as well if you want to kind of get a perspective of what they offer. Any questions on phase 3 before I move to phase 4?
I have a general question overall for this proposal. My concern is Manassas Drive and all of the great connectivity you want to have amongst all these phases. What's being done for pedestrian safety and connectivity with the increased traffic? I mean, right now, if this were to go in, we would have issues with people crossing safely and navigating around.
Yeah, so they put in some money for intersection improvement here. We're likely going to have to put additional safety measures for pedestrian crossing in other areas as well. But then you're right, that's going to have to be an ongoing kind of focus to enable. If we want to have this as an integrated development, that's going to be a key component of that.
Yeah, good question.
And again, all of this is made possible by the fact that we have the VRE station here, and we have that garage coming. That's what enables kind of these businesses to be interested in coming to our city as well.
Yeah, note that that's going to be a pedestrian overpass across the tracks from the parking garage, correct?
That's correct. Yep, there'll be a bridge there for pedestrians. Yep. And so that's a good point, because right now when you see these residents who live across the street here in Park 170 and Artena, and then all these future residents that we're adding, kind of the current route, you see them kind of walking to the VRE station in the morning. They're crossing the tracks, right? There's not sidewalks on the other side as well. It's not the ideal walking path for our pedestrians. The future will be a lot nicer, because they'll be able to walk here, cross the street, walk through a plaza, right? Another plaza here, and then the pedestrian bridge right here, right to the VRE station. So it's a kind of more direct access. And if you want to stop, get a coffee in the coffee shop, you can do that as well. This is just a kind of a image that the design team came up, and this is, again, a little bit outdated, but this is what was presented during the PPA approval process. Again, most of this is the same, but the plaza has changed significantly from this. You don't have all this landscaping that in the current plaza. You want it to be more of an open area, so that's changed. This is just kind of their initial kind of design, but you can get a feel for what this will look like. Across the street again is the Park 170, and then this is the phase 3 development with the garage. This is almost like an aerial view if you're on the top floor of the garage looking down. This is the building B that we talked about, kind of the office mixed with the anchor and additional restaurant end cap. The building C, the City Hall building and the plaza, and then again the connectivity with across the street. These end cap spaces are the most critical component for the Park 170 retail success, and we are engaging with multiple businesses right now pertaining to both those end caps, which are an exciting kind of investment for some of these businesses. We're trying to focus on kind of like a specialty market for this building B, but we're not, to be honest with you, we're not having as much progress. Most grocers and even markets, they really want to wait and see what happens with the rest of this development. Where we are having much more success is with restaurants.
That office building next to the theater, that didn't appear on any other pictures so far?
Yeah, it was. So you see, like here, like it was hard to. This is in 3D.
Oh, okay, I see it. It's there.
So that's kind of this part would be.
Yeah.
Again, the decision will be the theaters, right? Do they want to be co-located with others or not? They're kind of in the driver's seat because that's what they're the answer, and that's what we're tailoring this investment towards. Again, I already showed you this, so I can skip you that. I showed this earlier tonight, kind of with the plaza, the splash pad, and this is kind of a closer to what the end result was. This was a very initial concept of the plaza, but things have changed back. We got rid of a lot of this landscaping. We shifted the splash pad more to the center. We added the screen to it as well, but at least it gives you some idea of kind of what a plaza can be. And then we added across the street some additional kind of open space as well, and concert and staging areas. This is another view from Manassas Drive, driving from 28 or Euclid Avenue to the railroad tracks, kind of what you would see on your right, the existing Park 170 building, and on the left, this is kind of, again, notional concept of phase 3 on this. We don't have something like this.
They gonna lose the trees?
Yeah, we have to lose those trees. Yep, that's actually part of my negotiations with them right now, but they're in agreement.
Okay.
It blocks visibility of the businesses. You can see there's a great picture that just shows that. So you want to replace them with trees that will not do that.
Yeah, bushes.
Yep.
Small bushes.
We talked about this again before, so look them up. They have a theater now a little bit closer to us, just a couple hours away. If you're interested, post, right now or post-COVID, whenever you feel safe enough to go there. This is the phase 4 initial concept. Again, we haven't actually received a rezoning application yet from them. So whereas phase 3, the concept now is it's more fixed. So we already have a site plan with matching that concept that we've been talking about. Phase 4 is a purchase and sale agreement. So the city owns this property here. So we have a purchase and sale agreement to sell that property to the developer. The developer's been acquiring the properties over here. So they kind of combine that as kind of one master plan that was attached to that purchase and sale agreement to kind of guide their development. But they're in the process of developing their rezoning application right now and their site planning stuff. So, just if you're interested, you can kind of pay attention to kind of what's happening at the planning commission and governing body. Probably in a few months time frame, they'll probably be submitting that. But this development, again, the critical piece is the parking, and again, the latest shows the parking, a lot more parking up here as well to really service this retail building B and the residents of Park 170 as well. So about 150 space parking lot, and then 2 additional residential buildings, which is again what provided kind of the financial capacity of the developer to go ahead and start buying these private properties. How they were going to get a return on investment is these 2, and then this is a generic commercial building right now. And to let you all know, I'm really more focused on a hotel right now, and that's who I've been engaging with is is hotel users. Doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily here, but that I've been actively speaking with hotel groups about this location as well for as part of the downtown, but it can also be a commercial office in the future. There's not as much clarity on this commercial because, again, this isn't the primary kind of commercial focal point. The phase 3 development is. That's where you have more market viability per the marketing consultants that looked at this area. So the primary goal here was to start getting that parking for the Park 170 retail, allow us to amend the ground lease and clean up this area as well so it fits better with a mixed-use town center.
Connor House gone?
Yes, the Connor House will be located right here. That's part of the development.
Oh, so that will be taken down?
Yeah, there's a group right now, Historical Society group working with the county to see if they can't get it relocated. But that's kind of an ongoing effort.
And if you're familiar, it's a historic, Civil War hospital building or something.
Yeah. Any other questions on phase 4?
Nope.
And then these are just the developers who are executing this with Norton Scott. It was Toll Brothers. I need to update this. Toll Brothers was actually the first one who kind of brought this forward. They brought in the partner Norton Scott. This has since switched. They had some personnel at Toll Brothers, and this is now switched to most likely Stanley Martin to sign the deal with Norton Scott. So you're going to get Stanley Martin homes, but Norton Scott is the primary developer of the project for phase 3. And then for phase 4, you have Soylu Properties. They're a local developer, so they developed really half of Liberia Avenue adjacent to here, and they have a portfolio across the DC metro area, but their offices are located on Liberia, so they're a very local developer, and they own the Artena building, the 7-story apartment building, which is what first got them excited about this market and why we started pursuing partnering with the city to pursue the phase 4 development.
Do they have a handle on how many people in this area are using VRE every day to commute down to Crystal City and points east?
Yeah, it was pretty robust pre-COVID. It was why they had to build that garage, because they just had more demand than the available parking supply here. So they had a pretty robust kind of usage because we're the last station in this region until you kind of get to eastern Fairfax County in the Braddock area. So we service a pretty large kind of southwestern Fairfax County area. This portion of kind of surrounding Prince William. Since we're the last station on the line, we are a strategic VRE station. And to your point, since it feeds Crystal City, the long-term plans are to kind of invest in that station, have it connected not only with Amazon HQ2, but also Reagan National Airport. So there's a lot once Amazon HQ2 was approved, a lot more VRE investments were approved by the state as well to improve the transportation infrastructure to support Amazon HQ2. So we are a strong potential market for those employees as well. I attended an event where their HR rep was involved, and they're encouraging their future employees who are coming out here to live along Metro and VRE station areas as well. So certainly we're going to continue on.
Do we know what the projection is on that? The number of people that have increased as a result of HQ2?
Yeah, I don't remember. It's going to be as kind of slowly trickle in over the next 5 to 8 years, from my understanding.
But we're a lot more affordable here than anywhere, in Fairfax or any place else. Absolutely. At least that was my experience. That Manassas Park is very affordable for living. With that VRE connection, that makes it I would think, make it very attractive to people who work down in that area.
I agree.
Yeah, especially with the location being the last spot before the Fairfax County.
And it's a family-oriented community too, so it's a small city in every way.
Has VRE given any thought to once the Amazon group comes in, extending their services to Saturday and Sunday? Over.
I know. We've always talked about two-way traffic, but that hasn't happened yet.
Correct, and that had to get to the two-way traffic, and you needed the counts with the Amazon HQ2. You kind of are helping that, but there was also an investment for the Long Bridge, expanding kind of the capacity into and out of DC that was also required. That project was also approved for funding. So there's a strong push to expand VRE service. I'm not sure it's a weekend oriented though. I have not heard that, but I have heard the kind of more back and forth options expanding in over the next 10 years.
Thank you.
Kind of summarize kind of like why the city was making this a focal point. Again, every time we've engaged with our residents with surveys, with town halls, the overwhelming message from our residents is you need to reduce the tax, right? And that was a big part of this last campaign as well. But we knew that back in 2017, unfortunately with the debt spike that we were facing, it wasn't feasible. Now it's becoming more and more feasible. We fixed our financial situation, and now added with the downtown that's coming, you're going to be able to accomplish that critical goal that our residents have. Pay raises to retain employees. I know that's not always kind of on the top of the list for residents, but we exist in a marketplace, right? Our employees are recruited by other jurisdictions, and it's very hard to keep a strong service level when you have 25% loss in a department in a given year. It's hard to replace that. So we're the lowest kind of paid in the region. We're the lowest staffed in the region. You can say we're much more efficient, but we're also, you get kind of service level challenges when you're operating that way, and it's tough to kind of retain our dedicated employees that way. But doing this will allow us to kind of have more robust pay raises for our employees. Build up reserves. That was one of the biggest issues. We were actually in a negative financial position when we finally completed our 2016, 2017 audits in end of 2018. That's how long it took because of many issues, but we found out we were actually at a negative financial position. We need to kind of rebuild that reserve capacity. Unfortunately, the city was, from a cash perspective, dependent on the water and sewer enterprise funds during the year, and also dependent on the kind of short-term borrowing to make payroll and accounts payable. We're not there anymore. We've gotten much better. We've improved our reserve position, but we want to continue to do that for all the different reserve funds that we've established for the city, such as the rainy day fund to deal with the national business cycle, the operating cash fund, and the different cash funds that we have delineated in our budget. But that's one of our priorities as well, kind of strong, sound fiscal management. Provide our community with a central community gathering place. Again, we want to have a nice place to do kind of our mixed in with, the restaurants and other things, to do events like the, Christmas tree lighting and festivals, farmers markets, concerts, things like that, to service our residents and also the surrounding community as well. Revenue, again, for the actual expenditure side for schools, public safety, parks, roads as well. We talked about pay raises, but there's a lot of capital components and staffing components that are part of that as well. We at least want to get to pre-2009 levels of staffing capacity. So our population has grown by more than a third since then, but our staffing levels are still below what they were at that time in 2009. Additional job opportunities for our residents as part of this downtown. And like we talked about earlier tonight, one of the primary goals was to fund our unfunded capital liabilities without impacting current taxpayers. That was our goal, so that we could do this first bullet of cutting taxes while increasing spending, right? You only can do that with economic development. That's the magic. Because if you want to increase spending and cut taxes, but you're not improving your tax base, the math doesn't work. You just end up having huge deficits. So that's all I have is kind of a background for the mainly focus on the downtown. Again, that's our priority. We don't have an economic development department, so we have to prioritize on what we focus on, and this is what will then enable kind of putting Manassas Park more on the map for future, bringing in future investment in other parts of our city as well. So this is kind of the game changer for the city. Again, things were getting a lot better pre-COVID in terms of business deals, but I'm confident that we're establishing kind of the right structure to give the city the best chance to to start seeing significant business investment. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Falco.
All right, thank you.
I want to take a pause and just check in with our fellow directors. So we've been pushing almost 3 hours at this point. We have a few more things to get through. I don't anticipate they'll take very long. What I was going to suggest, do we want to take maybe a couple minutes, just a quick bio break, or do we want to just power through and get through our last couple of agenda items?
I say we just power through and knock it out unless anyone else needs a break.
Go for
I
it.
concur.
Yeah, you don't think it's not going to be too long, yep.
Yeah, I don't think so, because so all right, very good. Then the next item of business then is the EDA charter. We did send this out a couple of times before once I think before the holidays and maybe once after the holidays. I can't remember, but anyway, it wasn't a long read. Hopefully, you had a chance to look at them. And what I wanted to accomplish tonight is just to affirm the bylaws which currently existed. So before we do that, just want to open it up for discussion. Did anyone find anything in the bylaws that they felt, no, we really have to discuss this further, or consider revision?
Not me.
Okay, I'll take that. I'll take that as a no. So, so what I would like to do is I move that we affirm the EDA bylaws in their current form, without revision at this time.
Second.
Okay. And then let's put it to a vote. All those in favor of affirming the EDA bylaws, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? None opposed? So the motion carries to affirm the EDA bylaws. Thank you. The next item of business is the chairman's report. The only item for this report, for this meeting, is I wanted to welcome our latest director to the EDA, and that is Al Durr. Hi, Al.
Hello, all. Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Just want to take a
Hey,
moment.
Al, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Looking forward to having a chance to meet with everyone in person.
Likewise, Al. Thank you. All right. The next item of business is the director's report. So this is an opportunity for any of you to bring up anything that's on your mind, or anything that's kind of in your orbit right now related to economic development. All right. Hearing none, then we'll move on to the city manager's report.
Great, and I've probably spoken way too much tonight, so I have nothing further to add.
Thank you, Mr. Bethel. All right, the final item is then. So before we adjourn, just want to give a final moment to anyone on the call. Any final remaining questions, comments, or anything before we move to the last agenda item?
Yeah, this is a super presentation, series of great presentations. Really appreciate it.
Yep, very detailed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Very, very detailed. Well done. Well done. So before we move on to the last, I just want to take a moment just to thank everyone. There was a lot of information, great presentations tonight, a lot of information. Everyone powered through, and I'm really happy and proud of everyone. So well done to you all. It was a lot of information, long night, but I think that we're we're very well set up for next month's meeting. Final agenda item is adjournment. I move that we adjourn the January 20th, 2021 EDA meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Put it to a vote. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is carried to adjourn the EDA meeting for January 20th, 2021 at 9:56 p.m. Everyone have a marvelous evening. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Connor, kill it. Connor.
We're done.